and you'll be stuck with us. So thank you so much. And Scott, I'm going to record all this again because that sucked ass. I'm gonna record again. We're gonna start over at 1 minute.
Support the Posse. Some of my favorite channels on YouTube, like YouTube, Judas Priest, like on. All right, I think I made the cold open. Yeah, all right. Some of my favorite channels on YouTube.
Oh, you did it again!
Oh my god,
YouTube!
Oh,
come on,
man.
Okay, Boomer,
Woo.
You can get it. Oh yeah, duh.
I keep waiting for TJ because he has that deep in thought look.
That's just the eyes glazed over look. Because I'm tired.
tired as shit. All right, well,
that's the bedtime.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 45 of the Plastic Posse. I'm here tonight with two of my co-hosts, Scott Gentry out of Utah and TJ Haller out of DC. And we are super excited to be here tonight. We're missing two of our folks, Doug and Ivan. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it, but that's okay. You'll have Ivan in the interview later on, so that's awesome. With that, how are you guys doing tonight? Scott, what's up?
I am doing great. I had a great weekend. We'll talk about it here in a minute. Jim Bates came out to Salt Lake City. A bunch of us hung out. We went up to Hill Air Force Base, had a great time. So yeah, doing great. Getting some modeling done. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. TJ, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I was not on the main part of last episode, unfortunately. I think I had work obligations going on. So, but I don't have a whole lot to talk about since then. I have not done very much modeling at all. Combination of moving all the stuff in my basement and dropping my Sherman and having to fix it kind of killed my mojo on that. But I did go to our local show, the Model Classic. I'll go ahead and talk about that real quick while it's on me. But that was really fun. I hung out with the Model Geeks, hung out with our pal Jackson, met some other people. Martin Drayton from out your way, Scott, he was in town, just happened to be in town for work, and he cruised on by, so that was cool. And I got to see him. I won some awards. It was pretty cool. But the best part was my daughter, Natalie, won with her M5 Sherman Toon Tank, won her category, and then also won the Best Juniors, which was pretty rad. It's probably one of the coolest experiences in modeling is seeing her win, because she didn't understand what was happening. When she won her first award, they called her name and she looked over at my wife and I, and she's like, "Is that me?" I'm like, "Well, that's your name, isn't it?" And she ran up there and got her award. And she does this thing where she is really excited but doesn't want to show it, because she's a kind of reserved person. That I wonder where she gets that from. And she was doing like this half smile as she's walking up there, clearly very proud of herself. And then we sat through the whole awards. It took forever. And then they of course did Best Juniors, and they called her name, and she just was standing there. I'm like, "Oh, they just called your name again." She's like, "What?" Like, "That's you. You need to go up there.
Move.
You won the best." And everyone's like clapping and cheering, and it was really cool. And she was so proud of herself. She was taking pictures of it with her phone, and
Nice.
She has Snapchat, so she put it in she's holding her little medal. She has in her Snapchat stories, and she took it to school to show everyone. So it was really cool. It was pretty neat.
That's awesome.
How cool is that? It's like you said, I don't think there's anything better than, seeing your son or your daughter get to experience that and see the smile on their face.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't even care about anything I won there. That was it. That's the only thing that matters.
So what's next on her bench?
I don't know. Afterwards, because she's built a couple models, but I think this is the first. You guys have seen it. I know I've sent you pictures of it, and she painted camouflage on it and did a really good job. And I asked her, I was like, do you want to build more models? Like, you're clearly very good at it. And she said, yeah. And I'm like, well, what do you want to build? And she's like, well, I don't know. What is there? I'm like, there's literally models of everything, sweetie. So you just tell me what you're interested in and we'll build models together. I mean, she's like, oh, okay. And that's kind of as far as she got. So
Bandai Cup of Noodles, man.
yeah, because it's funny because they love ramen, and especially those little ramen cups, which I'm just like, there's like better ramen out there. We can go get good ramen.
Or a Pikachu figure. I mean, those are cool too.
Yeah, she's built the little bear guys.
Oh, nice.
The little Bandai bear guys. She's built a couple of those in the past, but I think this Toon Tank was the first thing she actually sat down and like painted. I made sure she was doing it right because she was using the airbrush. So, but she's kind of a natural. She's artistic anyways. Like, she loves to draw and paint paintings and make stuff out of clay. So I'm trying to nudge her towards it, but I'm not going to force it. But she sounds like she wants to like get more involved in it, which I'm all for, of course.
You should take her models to Nats if you can fit them in your bag. Take one and enter it.
Oh yeah, it's definitely coming.
Nice.
JB, what about you? You've been crazy busy.
Ooh, I'm in the same boat as TJ. I haven't touched much. I got the Stug to about 95%, and I posted some pictures online. So I really enjoyed the feedback I got from that. Lots of good chatter around that. That's the most fun is interacting with everybody. Outside of that, it's been really slow. I've been working like crazy lately, just no time. And I do have to apologize to IPMS members. I skipped 2 meetings that I should have attended for my office position, but unfortunately work came first. So I got to catch up with the folks around that, but we're making really good progress. And we have some great announcements coming out. I'll just do a quick plug. We established the National Contest Steering Committee. And for those that don't understand, the nationals, really every year it's put on by a local club, but we're looking to hopefully, formalize it more at the national level to give that support to local clubs. And, hopefully we get new clubs bidding and bringing the nationals to parts of the country that it's never been before. So exciting news coming. We just stood up the committee. We're doing a little bit of work behind it to get some of those resources built. And then we're going to be having some meetings with interested clubs for the 2024 and other future nationals to have that discussion around what are the bid parameters, what are the requirements for facilities, and really just helping educate everyone on the process and making it as smooth as possible. And hopefully, again, we see the nationals going to more places in the country that it's never been before and engaging more of the membership. So that's been really exciting. Like I said, I haven't gotten to much on the bench. I do have a few small projects I'm working on. Nats is right around the corner. Those need to be done. So those will be cranked out. And yeah, it's going good. Otherwise, I mean, I look forward to recording every other week. I think the most sometimes because it's been tough lately, and I don't want to spoil the topic because I think that's what we're going to discuss later is, getting through these times where we don't have the ability to get to the bench. And what are those things that really keep you motivated, keep you happy, and just make the hobby what it is. So that's enough about me. I'm going to turn it over to TJ to talk about one of our proud partners.
We are proud to partner with Tankcraft. They are a fabulous company that makes the highest quality products. They have some incredible new products and some incredibly cool stuff they will be announcing very soon. In the meantime, check out tankcraft.com and see how one of their Pro Modeler mats and one of their awesome aluminum glue bases really improve your workbench.
You guys see those their new tracks, the 3D printed KV tracks they came out with? And those things are sweet.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the Tamiya KV2 to get here so I can get a package deal, for crying out loud.
I think Tamiya needs a new shipping line. Their containers seem to get lost between here and there. We're all like, where's our Hellcats? Where's our KVs?
I think my feed for the last week has been every other post is a Hellcat, which isn't a bad thing.
Finally getting in people's hands here in the States.
Yeah, and I got to give a shout out to Jackson, one of our close friends that we had on last time. He's doing 3D work already on it. He's got light guards made, and I know he has plans to do more. He has access to a vehicle to the museum you've been to, I think in Virginia, right, TJ?
Mm-hmm. He volunteers there.
Yeah, so he has close access to that. It's really great because he shares a lot of his research on the M18 research group for the Tamiya kit on Facebook, and he also has a Cults 3D profile and has some really affordable STLs for people to download and print. So he's on the M18. I'm super excited, and there's also some 3D printed track options out there, and then the decal options are pretty sweet as well. Sorry to go on a M18 rant. I've resisted buying it, but I don't know how much more I can do that.
Your resistance is almost gone, huh? Almost used up.
It's futile. May the 4th be with us all in that case.
Well, I have one that our good friend Grant Mayberry sent to me, which is like it's super nice. Didn't even ask for it. He voluntarily gave it to me because that's the type of person Grant is. And I got some Def Model decals and the metal barrel. And Steve hooked me up with some stowage. And I also, our other buddy Steve Baker, posted something about
tracks,
like 3D printed tracks. I could less than $30 shipped.
Cheap.
I'm like, even if they suck, okay. I went ahead and ordered those too. They're coming from Poland, so they'll be here, a little longer than I like, but I don't plan on getting on that anytime soon. So.
And he started assembling them. They looked pretty crisp.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't beat the price. That's pretty cheap, and they look really nice. So
you wonder how they make any money, for crying out loud.
The aftermarket I was jonesing for was those see-through intake grates for the rear panel on the
those
Hellcat.
are sweet.
Man, those look so nice.
Maybe we can get Jackson to model some of those up. Have a domestic source.
Who is this Jackson kid?
Coming out of nowhere like a wrecking ball. Grizz, move on over. There's a new Top Gun in town.
That's right.
Gun.
Elbowed chisel dizzle right out of the way, man.
Oh man.
John, speaking of Tamiya, I gotta stop and just glow about these Tamiya LP paints. Man, the more I use them, the more, I just love them. I love all the acrylic lacquers, but man, these things dry so fast and the paint goes on so smooth. And the pricing, I'm getting them at my local hobby shop for, 2/3 of what their acrylic colors go for. I can't say enough about them. They're just fantastic paints.
Yeah, I would agree too. I've had the opportunity to use them on the Sherman Mark III, the New Zealand one, and they are gorgeous. I think the biggest benefit from my perspective is really the performance after you sprayed it, where it's like that eggshell finish, which I like. Eggshell is in the sheen, not the texture, and they are super nice. They dry super fast, super durable, and you can mix them with the XF line. And like you said, Scott, they're super cheap. I picked them up at Colpar here. I think they were like less than $250 for a bottle, which is significantly cheaper than the acrylic alternative. I was cutting mine with Mr. Leveling Thinner, and it's sprayed on smooth as glass. And I look forward to using them more. Again, if you're using lacquer paints, or any paints for that matter, highly recommended to use a booth and or a mask. There's your OSHA reminder. You don't need any safety incidents.
All right, well, it's time to send a shout out to the Posse Outriders. These are listeners who support the Posse by becoming Patreon contributors. If you'd like to support the Triple P and become an Outrider, it's really easy. Just head on over to our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Plastic Posse Podcast. And you can set up a recurring donation there. You can donate any amount you would like, and this support helps us to offset the cost of bringing you the Triple P. Posse Outriders get early access to episode drops, early news on upcoming events, and access to PMs with all of us here on the Posse crew. We've had such a response to our Patreon page that we've created 3 different tiers you can choose from. Posse Outriders, which starts at just $1 a month, get early access to episode drops, early news on upcoming events, and access to PM each of us here on the Posse crew. Posse Foreman, that tier starts at $5 a month, gets these benefits plus access to social events at upcoming shows. And after an initial training period, you're going to get some free Posse swag. And our top tier, Deputy Marshals, which is $10 a month, they're going to get all of these benefits for both of those tiers, plus even cooler swag after their training period, and also a chance to become a part of a future Triple P live stream or podcast. So having said all of that, the Posse Outriders for episode 45 are... Starting with our top tier, our awesome Deputy Marshals, we have Mark Bradley, Zach Pease, Joel Munson, Eric Brubaker, David Brian Bridges, a.k.a. DB Scale Model Studio, Jared Cow, JC Osborne, Mike Talley, Steve Baker, Bruce the Model Noob, Grant Mayberry, and Rick Cooper. Next, we have our Posse Foremen. We have Mr. Grizz, Rob Burnside, a.k.a. Red Beach One Studios, Jeremy Moore, the voice of Bob, Steve Munsell, a.k.a. Value Gear Head Honcho, Matthew Johnston, John Vitkus, Jamie Stokes, Craig Jarbo, Mike Bird, Jeremy Elliott, Mediocre Middle-Aged Modeler, Dan Knopfel, Eric DeGleish, and Eric Semmelmayer. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have our Posse Outriders. We've got Neil, Jackson, Simon, Martin, Chris, Lee, Robert, Brian, Matthew, Paul, David, Ethan, Steve, and Jamie. Man, that's a mouthful. Well done, deputies. We really appreciate your support. Thanks to everybody out there supporting what we do. We really, really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo Scott's comments. Thank you so much. Every name on that list means a lot to us. You're certainly not only our supporters, but our friends, and we hope to see you at a future show. If you're at the Omaha Nats, please stop by and say hi. Shoot a message beforehand. We'll catch you outside of show hours as well. We're here to chat, get to know you, and know you more than just a name. And again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support. You know, you can also make a one-time donation to the Posse via PayPal. To do this, just go to our website, plasticpossepodcast.buzzsprout.com. In the upper right-hand corner, just click that little heart icon, and then you can donate any amount you'd like. You certainly don't have to donate, but we really do appreciate it. We also appreciate if you leave us a positive review and give us 5 stars. This will help the Posse get out to more people interested in scale modeling podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, please stop by the Plastic Posse YouTube channel and subscribe. We're just spinning up that content, hope to get a lot more created, and certainly have a lot from the IPMS National. So please go on and subscribe.
John, what level of Patreon do they need if they want an autographed picture of TJ?
Oh, man, I'm at a loss for words. That's uber special. I
got no from TJ. I thought I would get something.
I thought he'd put on lipstick and kiss the picture and then give it over.
Just a reminder, the Posse is just one of several scale modeling podcasts out there. As you guys all know, we're a member of a group of great podcasts. And if you'd like to see a list of some of these other podcasts, plus some other social media creators, just head on over to modelpodcasts.com and you're going to find links to the other podcasts and the other creators there. Appreciate Stuart up at Scale Model Podcast for putting that together. We also wanted to remind you there's lots of ways to interact with the Posse. You can send us an email at plasticpossepodcast@gmail.com. Of course, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/Plastic Posse. You can find us on Instagram at Plastic Posse Podcast. Our Twitter handle is at Posse Podcast. And on YouTube, our channel is just Plastic Posse Podcast. TJ, Doug's not here. Do we have any feedback to talk about?
We do. We got a couple pieces here, so I'll start with this one. This is a message to both us at the Posse and Mojo. It says, "Hello, Posse and Mojo. I recently listened to episode 43 of the Triple P and episode 62 of PMM, and the Triple P featured an interview with the mini painter and YouTuber Lila Mev, the Mini Witch, and episode 62 of Mojo included a comment about Military Miniature Society of Illinois, MMSI, the annual show, which is primarily a figurist show, if I understand correctly. You do understand that correctly. I primarily consider myself a sci-fi what-if trash / scratch bash builder. At least that's what I aspire to. I watch a number of YouTubers from across the scale model and mini painting and diorama building spectrum, and I'm always a bit flummoxed when an expert in one corner of the broader hobby does not know about a technique that is basic in another corner. For example, seeing scratch builders using CA kicker, which is a cyanoacrylate kicker. It's like makes your super glue cure instantly, if anyone was curious. From a spray bottle, gunpla builders have been using high quality tungsten micro chisels for a while because adding panel lines is a big part of detailing in Gundam if you're doing more than out of the box. Meanwhile, military kit builders are still using our one-size-fits-all scribers that makes a V-shaped groove. I encourage all of us to branch out to the other corners of the hobby. Keep up the great work. This is from Raphael Shelton from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I agree with all of his sentiments. I like to consider myself a pretty well-rounded modeler. I only build in a couple things, but I'm familiar with all the different genres. And like him, I watch. If you're building something or painting something on YouTube, I'm probably going to watch it, even if I have no interest in doing it myself. So yeah, that was good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some of my favorite channels over on YouTube are either from other quote unquote genres, or they're like Boyle Hobby Time, where he's combining elements from a whole bunch of, different genres. and it's always really interesting to watch. I love it. And then, of course, you guys out there that are listening to us, you know that we are not genre specific. One of the things we want to do is break down barriers in between different types of work, because at the end of the day, we're all doing the same thing.
Yeah, Scott, you stole my thunder there. I was going to mention Boile Hobby. That is a really great example of someone that's, merging scale modeling with, electronics, with sci-fi, with dioramas, and really does it in a professional way. I love his videos. I actually watch a lot of them over and over again, and they're very inspiring. He's also out of the Denver area, so I might try to connect with him and see if we can get him on the channel, because he's great. His videos are, dare I say, soothing. So I really enjoy watching them.
Well, and I don't know about you guys, but I mean, you talked about Lila. That interview with her was so much fun. It's awesome to have that kind of, I don't want to say fresh, but, kind of different perspective compared to, guys that we normally talk about sort of in our quote unquote own corners of the hobby.
All right, another piece of feedback we have from Lynn I'm going to read is, hello, guys. As always, I love the podcast. Keep up the good work. Thank you. I know several of you have purchased 3D printers. 3D printing for the hobby has exploded. Totally agree. I have always wanted to do sci-fi subjects in 35th, but finding figures and accessories has been hard. Since 3D printing has become a cottage industry, maybe you could do an episode highlighting some of the makers that are out there, as well as what listeners want to buy. 100% agree. We mentioned Jackson a little bit earlier. He's creating content for Cults 3D. So Cults 3D is an excellent website where you can find, a lot of content from creators that is kind of in that. It's honestly like a freelancing site where they've had their designs up and you can download them. But I love the idea. Continuing, I would kill for a line of alien-style Marines in various figure sets with some value gear accessories, or 1/20th scale accessories for Mac kits. Generic sci-fi stowage scaled for Star Wars Legion or Warhammer would be awesome. Sci-fi is increasing in popularity, but aside from lighting sets and a little photo etch, the aftermarket products seem to be lagging. I would agree. As always, great job on the podcast. You guys have a talent for bringing great interviews to the table and really letting the listeners know what's going on in the hobby. Take care. Lynn Young. Thanks so much, Lynn. We really appreciate it. Scott's been delving into 3D. TJ, I'll kick it over to you if you have any comments around what Lynn talked about. What's the potential, and do you see yourself maybe integrating 3D with your Mac at some point in the future?
Yeah, if someone can make some 120 to scale stuff. I know, me personally, I'm not at the level of designing my own stuff and don't really have that much interest in it, because it's a whole other set of skills that I just don't feel like I have the time or the patience to learn, but I know a lot of people do. So I've talked to a few people about making some 120 to scale stuff. So hopefully that'll happen, because as anyone knows, Machining Krieger is it's ripe for any kind of accessory kits to make it, it's a utilitarian lived in, like science fiction property. So, any kind of the same type of stuff you would use in 1/35th scale armor works perfectly with Machining Krieger. You just need it to be bigger. That's all.
For sure. Scott, what are your thoughts behind that? I know you're delving down the rabbit hole for Machining Krieger as well.
Yeah, it's 3D printing is so cool. I mean, I waited to get into it until I felt like we had some little bit better machines and a little bit better technology. And, I think there's still a long way to go, but, the machines that we have, the prints that we're getting are incredible. I've had some technical issues with mine, but it sort of forces you to go through your process to troubleshoot it. And the Anycubic machine that I had a bad LCD. They sent me a replacement. I've got mine up and running again. But TJ, you mentioned the design. What you need to do is have a good buddy who spent 30 years as a CAD designer. I have a good friend, Dave Turner here, who I'll give a shout out, and he's awesome in CAD. And so we'll take apart for a model that we need or a design, and he'll be able to draw it up and do a great job. So that definitely helps, but it's really exciting. I think it brings obviously a different spin on your hobby. And for a sci-fi nerd like I am, and TJ, I know you are, it's pretty cool to be able to not just print a subject that there isn't a kit of, but print things in different scales. That's what's really cool. You mentioned the 1/20th scale.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. For Mac, there's one creator out there. He goes by Polynoise, and I'll share the link with our listeners. He's got some pilot figures. He's got actually a suit that kind of reminds me of a raccoon, and then he's got Cooster articulating arms. He just uploaded these. I didn't even know it's an optional main gun barrel. So he's got one for all for the Kuster and Croat, but one's like the Firefly. One of them's more German looking with the muzzle brake. And then he's got also a railgun that's pretty sweet too. And those STLs are only $2. So it's super, super cheap and they're pretty sweet. So I think the possibility is endless and I can't wait to see more.
Guys, we've got one more piece of feedback here from Andrew Armstrong out of Centerport, New York. And again, this is kind of unusual, but he's addressed this to several of our podcasts. It starts out, hello, benchers, geeks, Mojovians, the Posse, and you guys up in Canada. Stuart, that was not us. That was his words. I just want to thank you for what you guys are all doing. I've written to all of you at some point or another over the past few years. I got back into modeling in 2018. I'm a slow builder and an okay one. I don't model as much as I'd like, but being able to listen to you talk about scratches the modeling itch. I found On the Bench first, which led me to the Scale Model podcast. I've been with the rest of you since your humble beginnings. The way you guys talk about the hobby, your interviews with people in and around the hobby, and the camaraderie between all the podcasts really makes me feel like part of a group. We really appreciate that, Andrew. That's kind of, what we want to do. I can't make it to Omaha, but the reason I'm even thinking about it is because of the way you talked about Vegas and how stoked you are all for this year. I'm bummed that I'm going to miss out, but I can't wait to hear the stories and see all the pictures. My modeling has improved drastically over the past few years, and I credit the podcast. If I didn't learn a technique or trick from listening to you, I learned it from a YouTube channel or a Facebook post that I heard about on a podcast. Thanks, guys. Have fun at Nats this year, and what your efforts add to the hobby can't be understated. Well, I really appreciate that feedback, Andrew, and just keep doing exactly what you said, where we all just talk about this hobby that we love, and it's all about having a great time and getting better. So I really appreciate that.
All right. So let's do a quick peek in the Value Gear M3 M4 Sherman/Lee group build Facebook group, see what's going on in there. Been some good stuff lately. I want to start with Matt McDougall, and he finished his second kit. It's an M4 A175. He's also made some more progress on his T10 mine exploder, which is ridiculous and great. He's 3D designing the rollers. They look really cool. Props to him. That looks it looks really involved. It's just so goofy looking. I love it. Our good friend Peter Fizlatsky is just making more and more improvements to his first subject. He added a little mini art motorcycle, which looks like it nearly killed him because it's like most mini art kits, beautiful but a billion pieces. So that's doing good. He also listened to my suggestion and repainted the star on top of his captured ammo trailer. It looks much better. I got that idea because I saw a captured Kubel wagon or some sort of soft skin that was painted German yellow, Dunkelgelb, and the Americans had painted a olive drab square and then a white star on it. I was like, man, that looks pretty cool. So he did that, and that's neat. Our friend Zach Grizzle, he's making some progress on his weathering on his M4A176. It's coming along. The dirt on the side, like on the side of the hulls, looks really good. And the dirt on the turret looks fantastic. So I think he is a little down on it, but I think it looks pretty good. So just keep up the good work, Zach. And that's I would say that's probably been the highlights for the last couple weeks or so. I am making a base for my first entry. It's primed, and I just need to start painting it. So maybe this weekend I can steal some time away and come down here and just put a couple coats of paint on it. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what we got going on.
I liked Joel Middleton's M4 Sherman. I believe it's an A4 with small hatch. It's really nice, and he's got the canvas cover on the mantlet. So I am looking forward to what he's doing with that because there's some nice surface texture there, and it's a really crisp build too.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what TJ was saying about Zach's Sherman. When we met Zach, he would do really incredible builds with lots of detail, but he wouldn't paint anything. And he's come so far. And the camouflage that he's put on that Sherman, and now getting into pigments and all the other weathering, I think he's really coming along. And like all of us, he's hard on himself, but I think he's doing a really terrific job. And I can't wait to see the model in person. It's definitely going to be one of the standouts of our group build, I think.
And also another reminder to go check out our buddies over at the Model Geeks, their A4 scooter group build. I think we're all doing it. I don't know about you guys, but I've not made any progress on mine, but I'm going to. It's going to be done. I keep saying that every episode, but I'll buckle down and get that done because I really want to contribute to that group build, and I want to build an airplane. So figure that's a perfect opportunity.
Well, I have actually made some progress on my M3, M4 group build. I'm doing an M10 Israeli Reserve Sherman. That's been coming along good, but yeah, I'm also a little bit behind on the A4 build. So hopefully that will happen soon. JB, how are your group builds coming along?
Group builds are good. I got the Butte Panzer mounted on a base. I need to do a little bit more groundwork, and I got to put a German jacket on it. So that one's coming along good. The New Zealand Mark III is about done. I want to put some stowage on it, but it's good enough to like put away for a little while. And I have a base for it. I actually have a nice ceramic, or I forget the casting material that's used for. It's not plaster. It's a little bit stronger, and it'll be a road, and then I'll have it on a road, and it's clean. So we'll put a little bit of stowage on it, maybe a commander figure. So those will two be polished off. And then I have that Firefly E8 I'd like to get done. And then for the group build for the geeks, I started the A4. I haven't touched it in a while, but it's there. I think it's going to come down to one of those slammer builds where I just buckle down one weekend and crank the whole thing out and pull a TJ. So that's probably what's going to happen there. But it's going well. It's all good, and man, it's going to be here before we know it. So I just got to get this stuff done.
All right. Well, thanks, TJ. Those are good updates on our group builds and our own progress. Now comes the time in the episode where we're going to go into our feature segment. This is terrific. You guys are going to love this. Ivan and I, last weekend, were lucky enough to spend some time with everybody's favorite uncle Nightshift, Martin Kovac, and also Spencer Pollard. And Ivan and I had been talking about this idea for quite a while, but we wanted to talk about, with both Martin and Spencer, the parts of their work that weren't about the model. So, the groundwork, the structures, the other model making elements besides just the model, the figures, all those kinds of things. And man, what an amazing conversation that was. The perspectives were very different. It was the first time Spencer and Martin had spoken to each other. The conversation was really fascinating. So with that said, here's the interview. Welcome to another Plastic Posse interview. Today, Ivan Jensen Taylor and I are very pleased to be joined by two great friends of the Posse, Spencer Pollard from the UK and Martin Kovac from Slovakia have joined us today. Spencer, welcome back to the Posse. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for asking me back. The last time I was on was a lot of fun, I think. It was a really good conversation. Really enjoyed it. So thanks. Obviously, I didn't say anything that was too contentious or made you sort of shrug slightly. So yeah, brilliant. It's glad to be back. Yeah, really nice. And I think I said this the last time I was on as well, that I really appreciate you guys doing this kind of thing, because often when we put live videos out, or broadcasts, all that, those kind of things, often it's a personal thing. You're manifestly giving over information about yourself. Whereas these kind of conversational pieces and conversations like this that are done so well and so professionally, I think are things to be applauded. So once again, I thank you for doing that and spending the time to do that and asking very interesting people, myself excluded, but very interesting people that come on these shows to tell you about the hobby. I think that's great. So yeah, thanks once again. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Spence. And Martin, you as well. Welcome back to the Posse. We always have a great time talking to you, and it's fantastic to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's awesome. Hey, guys, and thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. Obviously, both Spencer and Martin are known for their incredible model making. These guys are also really talented storytellers, and it is specifically this aspect of their recent work that I wanted to talk about today. And so Ivan and I started talking about this concept, I think, Ivan, 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's been a long time planning. Yes.
Yeah. So our discussion today is going to be, I've called it, probably wrongly so, but I've called it Modeling Peripherals. So maybe put another way, we want to talk about storytelling with all of the elements of a model, a diorama, a vignette, besides the model itself at the center of these pieces. And so kind of where this started was something with each one of these guys. And the first thing was, I got a book from Spencer that he put together called The Legacy Collection Volume 1. Spoiler alert, this is one of my favorite modeling books. I love this thing. Spencer did not pay me to say that. When he initially posted the trailer for the book, what he said about it was the Legacy Part 1 is a detailed look at 4 dioramas that were built all using Francois Verlinden's inspiration, ideas, and techniques. So, Spencer, I'm going to let you talk about this. You're going to be a lot more eloquent than me, but let's talk about your Legacy Collection initiative, maybe how you originally came to decide on this as a concept and how that developed into these 2 books that you've put out.
The Legacy Collection was born of time that I had as the COVID pandemic struck in the spring of 2020. I found myself furloughed from work. I had no sort of kind of employment in terms of actually having to build models. And so I found myself at a bit of a loose end. And a conversation had taken place with Jonathan Mark, who was one of the drivers that we talked about with the Interesting Modeling company page and videos and that kind of thing that sort of spawned from this at the time. The way that it began was very simple, kind of bit of serendipity, actually. I was at a local model shop and they'd got the SDKSO 251 Hanamag in the shop. It was being sold for £10 or something like that. And just off the hoof, I thought, well, I'll buy that. You know, it was a kit that I'd been bought as a young child by my mom, and I kind of wanted to go back to it and see whether or not I could put it together using current techniques. Nothing to do with Francois Verlinden, just current techniques. Could I make a kit from 1970 dot into something that would be passable in 2020? And I did what all model makers do when they buy a kit. I threw it in the loft and I left it there for about 6 weeks, forgot all about it. And then during a conversation with Jonathan, this kit came up and I sort of mentioned it and said, I quite fancy building one of these. And I put it onto my Facebook page and I said, look, I'm going to build one of these kits, but I'm actually thinking of not building it with current techniques. I'm thinking of building it with older ideas. So washes, dry brushing, that kind of thing, simplify the process, and a kind of a sort of a Verlinden-esque kind of thing. Some people came back and said, well, why don't you do it as a Verlinden build? Use all of those techniques. Use his models and use those kind of techniques. And I slept on it, and the following morning I thought, that's actually a pretty good idea. I know Francois anyway, and I know his techniques, and I basically felt comfortable that I could ape everything that he'd done on his early models again. I think this has become clear over the last 2 years to anybody that's followed me, is that it's a bit of an obsession. Francois Verlinden's early work is a bit of an obsession with me, to put it mildly. And so I know pretty much every model he ever made. I know how he made them. I know how he painted them. I know which accessories he put with them, that whole kind of thing. It was a bit like being a groupie for a band, you know, and understanding their entire back catalogue. I did it for Francois Verlinden's models. So that's what I decided I was going to do. And I was going to build this model, and I was going to try and create something that was fundamentally looked like something he would have built. But I took it then a bit further, and then I decided to build a diorama. And if I was going to build a diorama, what I then decided I was going to do I would sculpt a building that looked like an MDA building or a DCS building from the 1970s. And I would just capture that look. And alongside that, I would use only accessories and only figures that were released at the same time as the 251. And so I had an idea in my head. And that was where that Hanamag diorama pinned down came from. That came from that core idea. And then a friend of mine got in touch with me, Andy Farmer. Andy Farmer is the main buyer and seller for the hobby company in the UK who distribute Tamiya and Italeri and Dragon, amongst other things. And he contacted me and he said, do you realise that the Hanamag is in the top 5 best-selling military miniature kits in history from Tamiya? It's been on sale since it was first released, and it's in their top 5 bestsellers. So I sent him a message back and I said, what are the other 5 kits? What are the other 4 kits in that top 5? Panther, the old Panther, Panzer II, Flak Panzer 36, 37, the Chieftain, and the Hanamag. They make up the top 5. They're the 5 best-selling kits across the whole of the military miniatures range. They outstrip everything else by tens of thousands of kits. Simple as that. So he said, if you're going to do the Hanomag, why don't you do the other 5? Well, the other 4, rather. And I thought, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Wasn't that keen on the idea of doing the Panther, because I knew that the Panther was just basically rubbish. But the others, I thought that would be kind of cool. And alongside the Panzer II, I also had an SAS-G, which I'd got in the loft. And that kind of spurned some kind of idea of bringing those 2 kits together. They were released 5-6 years apart, but I thought that would be kind of cool. And that's where it came from. That's where the Legacy collection came from. It came from that simple idea of needing something to fill my time during the spring and summer when basically the world was falling to pieces around everybody, and not go into hiatus and build something that I didn't think was worth doing. I think I've sort of made this clear over the time. I don't really build models to relax, if that's not an odd thing to say. I build models because I need to satisfy my creative urges, the creative part of my brain. But I can't really build models just to think, well, I'll build it and nobody will see it and I'll just put it away. That's not how I work, and I haven't worked like that for 30 years. So I had an idea, I had a collection, I had a bunch of kits which they sent me, and I just worked my way through that, and it went from being a very simple idea to something that was a bit more developed. And then as time went through, the projects became more involved, the detail became more, the processes became more involved, the techniques were more cutting edge, they were more in line with what I did. So from that first Hanomag build, I then developed it on to doing the Honda S600 diorama, which is the one that's in the garage with all of the racking and everything behind it, which is a completely different look. Chieftain was painted with my normal bank of techniques. And then I went on to doing the Panther, which was the very final one that I built. And that was a different kind of diorama idea. And I super detailed the model and all of that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, that was what it was. It was a simple idea developed out to fill time. Nothing more than that. But it was... I talk about this in the second part of the book, in the second volume of the book. It was an itch I needed to scratch, if that makes sense. I needed to go backwards to allow my modeling to develop and move forwards again. I needed to deconstruct everything that I'd learned. I needed to deconstruct my ideas, my approach. I needed to deconstruct what I thought was important, and what that meant was simplifying everything. Those dioramas are rock solid simple, every single one of them. And I took it right back, and I decided that if I simplified everything, then when it came to doing things that were a little bit more involved later on, then I could base it on that bedrock and then move forward rather than getting bogged down, and I could speed up again and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was an emotional project because I was paying homage to somebody that I hold in higher esteem than anybody else in model making. But it was also a fundamentally important process for me as a model maker to deconstruct myself and learn about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And as a result of that, it means that I have now a much simpler approach to, and we'll talk about this later when it comes to planning. I have a much more simplistic approach to the hobby than I did have 2 years ago, all as a result of that collection.
The other motivation for this topic, Martin, has been watching your work on your Nightshift channel over the past 12 months. There's been for me, a kind of change of your recent work that kind of started when you did the painting of the 3 figures for your T29 build. And then you kind of continued that on with your videos. You've made barns, you've sculpted houses and structures, you've focused on scenery. And so all these other storytelling elements have become a big part of your channel. One specific example, I don't think there's even a tank in the whole video, as you did a video on carving bricks and stones out of styrofoam. It certainly doesn't, make them less compelling. But anyway, as this kind of work has become increasingly more significant, has this been a natural evolution for you, or is this by design?
It's been a natural evolution that was started by brute force, because my initial motivation to start making dioramas was basically the YouTube comment section bullied me into it. They kept nagging me all the time, like, make a diorama, do something different. And then when I finished the Tiger F13 and I built that Syrian T90, that horrible kit from Revell, I thought, hey, this is kind of fun. Why not try something new? You know, let's make a small scene, let's call it a diorama, and let's use the stuff I have at home. So basically weathering products, not actual, terrain modeling stuff and so on. And by then I already had a 3D printer, so that opened a few new possibilities and everything. And I just had a blast, So then I kind of knew that I want to continue this trend and try different things and, go into more detail and everything. So I bought an air drying clay, for example, for the terrain and everything. And then it just naturally progressed. And not just the techniques, but also, not the size of those dioramas, but I'd say their complexity, because from the beginning, I was mostly, let's be honest, just building vignettes and I don't know who called it like that, decorated display stands. So there was nothing really going on there.
That's a great description.
And so I think the real breakthrough was the T29 diorama, because before that I finished the Yak Tiger scene, and that was just really just a display stand, nothing else, No matter how I tried to sell it, it was just a display stand. And so the T29 was a breakthrough because that was an actual diorama, but it's not a really good diorama. It's actually pretty bad. And it does. I think, in all my humbleness, it doesn't fail on the actual techniques, but where it stumbles, it's the composition and the presentation. So I think it was after that, I started building the T55, then I broke my leg, so no diorama there. And then, no matter how much people didn't care about it, the Samiwa diorama with the brick wall and the tree, I personally think that's my first, let's call it successful diorama, because it actually looks the way I wanted to present it. No matter if the tank itself isn't really nice, it's not my best work, but come on, I made it with a broken leg, with a cast from my toes to my crotch. Okay, give me a break. And and then what was after that? Yeah, the Normandy diorama. That was like full on everything, balls to the wall, high octane diorama action with a huge building, a dog, 3 figures, telegraph pole, cobblestone road, tall grass, just everything, So yeah, that was pretty interesting and really time consuming. Who would have thought? And then I thought, okay, let's make something more simple. So then the Mark IV diorama came to happen. And yeah, despite most of it being covered with epoxy resin, which was something completely new for me, actually not so long ago, it was actually pretty simple. And it wasn't so time consuming to actually finish. And yeah, it was fun. And then it was when I started to realize, if you want to make a diorama that looks nice as a whole, you need to find balance between each element. So let's say you're really passionate about tanks and dioramas are more like your side gig or something. Then you probably might think about simplifying your approach on the tank itself, because you might invest your soul and heart into the tank and then it will stand out too much. And yeah, that's actually it. The last diorama I'm working on right now, the A7V stuck in a trench, that's like the natural progression of things. I think the main difference with this diorama and all the previous ones is that this one actually has a lot of mass because it's huge. The portion of the terrain is like almost 3 times as tall as my all previous dioramas. We're talking about just the wooden sides, And yeah, so even if it might not look like it, there's actually, always something new that I'm trying to do and everything. So yeah, call it a natural evolution that was kind of started a little bit forcefully.
Well, building on that, before I hand the ball over to Ivan to talk about some specifics, I want to follow up both Spencer, both what you spoke about with the Legacy Collection, and Martin with what you've been just describing. It almost sounds like the storytelling aspect, the making of the dioramas, expanding just from the models, that kind of feeds your passions, makes the modeling more personal, more enjoyable.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it depends on how you're approaching what you do. Listening to Martin talking, it's really interesting that it's an evolutionary process in terms of what he can create and how the sort of the levels of complexity and technique evolve. I guess naturally on a curve through that work, each time trying something new and different to come up with it, not necessarily just a different idea, but also incorporating something in it where you go, yeah, I've evolved that. I've evolved that paintwork. I've evolved those details. I've evolved that setting, working the way through it. I guess on some of Martin, I did the reverse, really. I didn't evolve anything. I just sort of spun the whole thing on its head and kind of chucked all that out of the window and sort of, stepped back to being a kid again, kind of thing. But certainly for me, a lot of, I think it's worth saying, and I don't think I'm sort of, saying anything people don't really know, that a lot of Francois' dioramas, we go to the Legacy Collection because it's underpinned by his work. A lot of Francois' dioramas are what Martin said. They're glorified display pieces. They're bases on which he's built a vehicle that back in the 70s would be used to sell a product. That's what they're there for. They weren't designed as competitive pieces necessarily. Italeri would send him a Crusader tank, and he would build a Crusader, put it on a diorama with a couple of figures, and that would then be used as the kind of the props to sell that kit. In latter times, in the sort of the mid to late 80s, when he had his shop in Lierre, he was building brand new kits that were coming in so he could put them on the glass countertop in his shop, and people would go, oh, that's the new Chaffee. Do you have those in stock? Well, actually, yes, I do. Pull them off the shelf, hand them over. And then he started sort of casting DCS buildings and all of that kind of stuff that went with it. It was a way of selling products. It was for no other reason. So consequently, they don't really tell a story necessarily other than here's a tank with some crew looking at a map. That's a pretty simple story, but it isn't really a story. It's not the sort of story that's going to get commissioned by Netflix for a 2-season show that people are going to watch for the next 2 years. It's just sort of there. And a lot of that early work, a lot of the things, you look at it and go, yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that. It's nice. It doesn't really tell a story though. There isn't much of a story in there. And I think, and as sort of later dioramas became, he was building stuff up to the point he sort of retired, less and less so. But sort of as a counterpoint to that, other diorama builders then started to create dioramas that had a much more focused story. You would see them and you'd look at it and go, yeah, I know exactly what that means. Good example of that is Shep Payne. Shep Payne's dioramas always had a story. Every single diorama that he ever made had a story to tell. Every one. I can't think of a single example of a Shep Payne diorama that I've seen, and I think I've seen them all, that doesn't have a story as a core tenet within that setting. You just think about it. Think about all of them. You think about Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, which is the 88 in the church. That's the story. There is the incongruity between a gun crew and the surroundings being the church. It was the first time we'd seen a diorama that had an action scene of a military unit fighting inside a church. And so that was what that scene was. We talked on here the last time about Aid Station. Aid Station is probably one of the finest dioramas I've ever seen. And it's about 6 inches square. And basically all it is a Jeep coming around the corner of an aid station building that's being used by American troops for first aid. And it comes around the corner, it's got a stretcher on the back, and it's on 2 wheels as it comes around the corner. Well, you can see the story bang there. And what I love about that work, and what I love about Shep's work in particular, is he doesn't have any superficial nonsense with it. You look at his dioramas, there are very few accessories on them. Aid Station has in the one that went into the Tamiya catalogue, it has a pile of boxes in the front corner. in the front left-hand corner. And the reason those boxes are on that part of that diorama for the catalogue is that originally there were 2 dead bodies covered in tarpaulins in that point. And it went against Japanese sensibilities. They said, we can't have dead bodies on the dioramas. So they removed the dead bodies and covered over those points with a pile of wooden boxes that covers over that. It's the only accessories in that diorama. There's none anywhere else. In contrast to what Francois did, where he had accessories everywhere, just to kind of fill spaces and all of that sort of stuff. But I think it's over the years, the storytelling aspect of dioramas has become more and more important. And that's one of the reasons why I found building dioramas to be more and more difficult, because you're constantly looking for a storyboard. You're looking for a core that you can use inside that. Often the way I get around that is I think of a title. And if I've got a title in my mind, then it sort of works. An example of that is Moran van Gils did a diorama for Euromilitaire 10 years ago or so. And he called it the 101st Dalmatians. And it's basically a panther that's on its nose in a ditch. And you've got a bunch of American soldiers around it, and one sliding down the belly of the panther holding a Dalmatian dog. And it's the 101st Airborne, and it's called 101st Dalmatian. And the Dalmatian is the dog. That's the core part of his diorama. And I thought, that's kind of cool. Just keep the title. Just use the title and then work from that. So that's sort of how I go about it, really. But which makes it sound ultra simple. Spence comes up with an idea. He comes up with a title for a diorama, and then the next thing, he's got a diorama in front of him. That title may have taken me an eternity to sort of reach, but that's sort of the way I go with it. Did I go off topic there? I'm not sure whether I did or not. I seem to have rambled.
I don't think so.
A little bit. So, but yeah, that's where I come up with it. Well, I told you, happy accidents, as one cotton bud haired artist once said. Mr. What's his name? The little guy who does the oil painting. Bob Ross.
Oh, Bob Ross. Yeah.
Bob Ross. There you go. He talked about happy accidents, didn't he?
So let's talk about the idea of using modelling elements for the purpose of storytelling. Obviously, the best dioramas in vignettes, or at least the most memorable ones, are the ones that tell compelling stories. And both of you are extremely talented and skilled at that, regardless of what you both say. So, Martin, I want to start this one with you. Who or what has been a significant inspiration for your work with regards to this idea of telling stories with your modelling?
Okay, so I think the biggest influence on me was the pretty well-known German modeler Volker Bembenek, who's pretty well-known for his dioramas such as In Position on Hill 112 from Normandy, or the Desert Hulk with the Bishop in the Desert, or Desert Hulk 2.0 with the Paladin, and so on. So yeah, his work caught my eye a long time ago. But back then, I didn't know why. I just liked his dioramas. There was something about them. So then I started exploring his work and trying to understand how he thinks and works, but not just in the terms of storytelling or composition, but also the overall balance. I think it's the balance of everything that makes his work so pleasant to look at, And then as I started exploring other great diorama modelers, I really started studying dioramas from, as mentioned, Marijn van Gils or Mirko Bayer or Per Olav Lund, these Nordic modelers. So yeah, you can kind of draw inspiration from everyone, and kind of it's like with models and weathering or building models, You can like many modelers and take something from Adam Wilder, take something from Mike Rinaldi, and so on. And then you sort of start melting these elements together, or different approaches, and kind of starting to come up with your own stuff. I don't think I'm quite there yet with my own stuff, so to say. So I'm always kind of looking and thinking, like, what would Volker do, for example. And also, I'm terrible at coming with my own ideas. So I often use either historical photos or something mundane from everyday life as an inspiration, or as a basis for the setting itself, So Yeah, and you guys keep talking about storytelling and everything, and I don't know what to say here because objectively, I'm a terrible storyteller. Because if you look at my dioramas, the story isn't really anything special. And it comes down to two things. First off, I don't have time for that. And second, I'm limited by the selection of figures that I can find on the market because unfortunately I don't have the skill and I don't have the time to learn this skill to convert, adjust, or sculpt my own figures for the sake of my very special, non-existent storytelling ideas and skills. So I kind of need to work with what I have, And sometimes not sometimes, it's almost every time when I'm, buying paints or anything that I'm missing, I always go through the selection of figures, and if something catches my eye, I just buy them, might never use them, but I have them, So yeah, me and storytelling, because again, if you look at these dioramas that I mentioned, they are basically still life scenes, so to say. Nothing is really happening there. Right? The Yak Panther diorama is just the Yak Panther crew chilling on a meadow in France, playing with dogs. Okay, maybe that's a story. But it's nothing special, The Mark IV is just a soldier walking by a sunken tank. Nothing really happening there. The T-29 diorama, just two American tankers looking at the GI who's waving at them to stop or something. What else? The Samiwa diorama, two tankers just looking somewhere in the distance, whatever might be happening there. This A7V diorama, just two soldiers looking at each other over the tank, So nothing really special story-wise going there. So I'm kind of at a loss here.
Well, far be it from me to disagree with my guests, but maybe they are leaning more towards being vignettes and less for dioramas, but a vehicle on, to use your term, a glorified display stand versus a vehicle that has other storytelling implements, figures, and you mentioned one of your recent pieces has a dog in it and structures. All of those help make that vehicle seem like it's in the right environment. It gives it more credibility. It makes it more visually interesting to see a tank that has a story around it that looks natural, that looks like it belongs. Spencer, you said some of the same things about Francois' work, where they were designed to be displays, but why those were effective selling tools was because those vehicles and those figures and everything around it look like they belong. And that inspired all of us at home or that walked into the hobby shop or looked at the Verlinden catalog or watches Martin's videos to go, wow, that's inspiring. That's something I want to do.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking as Martin was talking. A lot of what I do is very similar to that. It isn't. There is, like I say, there's no grandiose story to a lot of what I do. Part of Martin and I have probably a similar need when it comes to what we build and the way that we build it and that kind of thing. Martin's doing it for his online work. I'm doing it for the work that I do in print. So we're sort of coming at the same problem from slightly different directions, but hitting it at the same point. So if, for instance, Marcus gives me a model and says, here's a model, can you build it? Can you put it in a vignette? I'm the same. I don't have time to sit there and go, wow, yeah, can I build something that's going to win a gold medal at Scale Model Challenge? And no, I haven't got time to do that. Basically, I've got to build a model, a diorama, photograph it and write it up in a month. So I haven't really got the time to be able to think too much beyond that. Everything has to be at speed. I have to hit the ground running and then sort of work with it. I guess a good example of that is the Archer that I've just completed. That thing, there was kind of, I built the model first. What can I do with the model? How can I sort of set it up and do all of those kind of things? So you really do have to sort of, I don't know, sort of think beyond sort of being clever to to just creating something that's I guess manifestly interesting to look at. One of the reasons why I like Martin's work as much as I do is it's manifestly interesting to look at. There's no doubt about it. You look at those set pieces and I look at them and I think, yeah, I like the color combinations, I like the setting, I like the layout, they're balanced, there's loads of detail on them. They all look like they're built by Martin as well, which I also like. He's got a distinct style. I'm sure if I walked into a show, saw his work on the table, I'd go, yeah, that's Martin's work. That's his. Even if I'd never seen it before, I'd have a kind of an idea that it was his because of the way that he does. Volker Bembenek's work, I could see Volker's work in a crowded room from the other side of the room, from the balcony. I'd be able to go, there's Volker's work, And same with Perre Lovelund's work. He's sort of taken that off in a different direction. I think almost what sets these dioramas apart more than the story actually is that they all have a very distinct style. We mentioning Francois and Chet Payne. Francois' dioramas had a very distinct style. You just look at them and you go, that's Francois Verlinden's. Chet Payne's, you look at it, you go, yeah, that's Shep's. And now it's the same with the current group. It's the same with all of the I could pick out a Phil Stuchinski's diorama in a crowded room. It wouldn't be difficult. I just go, that's Philip's work. In fact, that happened 3 years ago. I don't think this model's ever been online. I've never seen a photograph of it. He's built this amazing new diorama that's got 2 tiger tanks in it. 2 tiger tanks and a massive tree, and underneath the tree is a blitz or something like that, big truck, and it's filled with ammunition, and it's got a big farmhouse in the background. And I walked up to it. I'd never seen it before, and I was like, that's Phil's work. That's Phil's diorama. And he was at the show, and I walked up to him. I said, Phil, that must be your diorama. And he went, yeah, it is. And he's never shown photographs. As far as I'm aware, it's never been in a book, it's never been in a magazine, it's never been online. And in fact, he said to me, please, just keep it to yourself, kind of thing. But I could see it was his work. So I think that maybe that's almost more important, that you're creating a visual body of work that other people will be able to reference and other people will be able to be inspired by. I feel that Martin's maybe, being sort of slightly too self-effacing, sort of almost diminishing the way that the dioramas look when that's not how anybody else sees them, certainly not how I see them. Yeah, is there anything wrong with creating something that's a glorified display base for a nicely painted vehicle and some figures? No, absolutely not. Why would there be? And to suggest otherwise, I think would make people feel that their work was somehow diminished as a result of that. I think that would be something that we need to sort of very much go against, don't we? So it's not, if somebody shows you a diorama and says, what do you think of this? Do you like my diorama? In inverted commas. If it ticks all of those kind of boxes, then I think they've done what they've set out to do, haven't they? They've created a home for the vehicle. And I agree with what you said earlier. You said that, that when you're building vehicles, they make more sense when they're in a vignette or a diorama. It's nice to look at a really lovely painted vehicle on a nice wooden plinth with a nameplate by it, but put some groundwork underneath it and a couple of figures by the side of it. It gives it a sense of scale, it gives it a sense of purpose, and it gives it an operating theatre where you can look at it and go, yeah, I imagine that's kind of where it is.
Yeah, Martin's Mark IV. Sorry, Martin, to talk about you in the third person again. His Mark IV that he did recently, he took a Mark IV, and he could have made a Mark IV just by itself, and it would have been lovely. We all would have liked it. But, he took a saw to it. He sunk it into a swamp. He poured water all around. I mean, and the way that he presented it really makes it, like you said, Spencer, much more interesting. But also, again, I think it gives it more credibility because it's integrated into all the other elements of the scene.
It's quite literally integrated with the epoxy resin further.
It must be heavy as well.
Yeah, it must weigh a lot.
Actually not. Yeah, because most of the volume is made by styrofoam. So
okay.
It's actually pretty lightweight. All of my dioramas are pretty lightweight.
But I think that's where you guys do such a good job with that. Because although you say you don't have time to be trying to work out a story to show or tell, what you do is allow the viewer, like me, for example, to look at your work and make that story in my head through what I'm seeing. So, for example, the Mark IV that's destroyed and it's submerged in a crater, and the soldier walking past, it's like, that allows me to think, it's like, right, that's a tank that's been destroyed. We don't know who's winning the war at this point. He's looking back at that tank thinking, that's another one of us. We've lost another tank. It's not going well. It's doom and gloom. So it allows us, although it may not be your intention, it gives us the opportunity to maybe invent our own story through your art. And I will use that word art because I think it is.
The one thing I think it'd be interesting to see whether Martin feels the same way is once I've completed a diorama and I've got it on my desk in front of me, I ask myself one question, and I ask it with every single diorama that I ever build. Could I imagine myself standing in the middle of that scene and looking at it as an actual place? Could I imagine being there? Could I step, if I could shrink myself down to 54 mil, could I step into it and see myself in there? And if the answer to that is yes, and it doesn't matter how complex it is, then I feel like I've succeeded. If I look at it and go, no, it looks like a model. It looks too, I don't want to use the word fake, but I can't think of a better word at the moment. It looks too sort of manicured, too heightened, too accentuated as a piece. If I don't feel that, and if I feel that what I'm looking at looks like reality, a real setting, then to me that's how I judge the success of my piece, rather than thinking, well, I've micro painted the tank. That looks great. The figures are great. None of that matters. What matters is, does the location work for me? Can I imagine myself stood there? If I was stood there, would it look like this? And if I get to that point, then that's to me a successful piece, I guess. But if I don't feel that way, as I didn't with a diorama that I did a few years ago, that I took to Euromilitaire, which was called The Game's Afoot. It was based on a video game. It got an Abrams on it and a load of accessories and a ISO container and all. And I based it on a game I was playing. I hated it that much that as soon as I got it back home, I smashed it. I smashed the whole lot and just thought, that's rubbish, and just got rid of it, because I all the way through I was thinking, I'm forcing this too much. It's just not working. And yeah, I completed it, took it with me, looked at it on the table and thought, that really is just rubbish. And I got it back and I stripped everything off it, took all the accessories off, which I've actually reused on other dioramas, took all the accessories off, and I threw the rest of it in the bin because I didn't feel that it wasn't a setting that I could imagine myself in. So yeah, I'm interested to see if Martin feels the same. It's just one of those questions I always ask myself: does it look real? Can I imagine myself standing there?
I actually smashed a few of my models today.
Oh,
yippee!
Yeah, I just took the Friel model tracks from them and just completely smashed them because I was making some space in my display case. So some of them had to go. Yeah, and the first one was quite painful. So I thought, okay, I need to make this as respectful and as painless and as humane as possible. So I gently placed it in a cardboard box and I just stepped on it, like stomped on it. And it felt pretty good.
that hurts.
Makes it sound like you executed your model.
I just finished them. But no, seriously, like a bunch of them were damaged from transportation and everything. Some of them were starting to fall apart, so I just pretty much just finished them. I gave them the finishing blow. But to your point, Spence, I never really thought about it like that. Maybe it might be a subconscious thing, because as you were talking about it, I imagined, yeah, I could really I would really like to spend some time in my dioramas, because maybe that's why all of them are still lifes and all of them are just have quite a chill, normal atmosphere. I could take a smoke with those German tankers playing with the puppy. I could, I don't know, take a walk through a battlefield in World War I if I knew nothing would happen to me. I wouldn't like to fight, so maybe that's why I'm not building any combat dioramas. But yeah, that's in terms of storytelling, if we can call it like that. I guess my intention is always to make something that looks peaceful. Like everyone's having a good time, sort of, just vibing and everything. So yeah, but no, I didn't really think about that once. What I do, but not just when I finish a diorama, I actually do it all the time from the beginning. I always set the main viewing angle. That's where everything should be composed as intended, as interesting, as pleasant, as eye-catching as possible. And I always, no matter if it's the initial composition where I'm just using styrofoam mock-ups or and everything, or during the painting stage and everything, I always look at it from the front, from the main viewing angle, and think like, okay, is this interesting enough? Is this showing well enough? And everything. And I always check that. And then once it's finished, and even when I go away from my workbench and I'm sitting in my computer, maybe looking over my shoulder, I turn the diorama so I can look directly at it. And if it looks the way I imagined, and when I feel like, okay, I made the front, the main viewing section, as good looking as possible, then I'm satisfied with it. That's why I said the T29 diorama fails, and it's a pretty awful diorama, because when you look at it from the front, it's just a mess. You need to turn it around to make it look more interesting, to actually see what's going on. And that's a failed diorama for me. So since then, I was paying a lot of attention to this. The initial planning, make it as interesting as possible from the one main angle. So you don't, if your friends come over or you're on a modeling show, you don't have to turn the diorama around, let me turn it to 5 degrees because it looks more interesting that way, but there's no room space. Oh, okay, No, make it look as good as possible from one angle. The other ones are just a cherry on top. It's basically, when I'm thinking about it, I'm sort of trying to make a postcard in 3D, And sometimes when the timing and luck is right, the diorama looks actually good from two sides. For example, the Egg Panther diorama can be viewed from the front and the right side. So, because there's no cut in the building visible, the black void at the back side of the building. The Mark IV diorama is technically viewable from all sides, because nothing is blocking the view. Same is going to be with the A7V diorama. But not all of them are designed like that, of course, but that's, of course, not a mistake. That's just a matter of what elements are you using. And yeah, I guess that's the whole spirit of how I try to create a diorama, to make it good looking from the front and make it as interesting as possible. And this is something I picked up from Volker's work because even though he doesn't mention it in his articles, but you can see it when you look at his work more closely. And I always remind myself, whenever I'm building a house or a piece of terrain, or I'm building a tank, and I'm working on each individual section, I'm always telling myself, make it as interesting as possible. Make it as interesting as possible. Add something here. Make something different here. So it's sort of try to get the most out of every square inch of your work, basically. Yeah, then there's, of course, the question of balance, because suddenly it might become too much. But yeah, that's a completely different topic that I'm not sure I'm confident about to talk about yet. Because that's really tricky.
I mean, that idea of seeing a diorama, building a diorama where you have one main focal point, that's how I've always created my models. My dioramas are never supposed to be looked at from behind. And in fact, a lot of the time, I don't even worry about the structural details. If I build a building, it's a facade. It can be a corner building, but it essentially is a facade. I'm not interested in doing everything from the other side. They're not a band that gets seen on a round stage and everybody sort of sees them, in the round. They are what they are. They're point of focus scenes. You look at it from one angle. It's why I would put a nameplate in one place. That's where it gets displayed from. It's not supposed to be moved around. I guess if I was doing a more competitive piece, I would at least tidy up the back. But I mean, on a lot of them, they're not like that at all. I photograph them from that point. They're supposed to be looked at from that point. You can look at them from above and all of that sort of stuff. But I think I have a sneaking suspicion that the last time I was on here, we might have talked about this, that I tend to only focus on my models, whether it be a piece of armor or an aircraft or whatever, on one side more than the other, because I know that I'm only going to really look at it from that side if I display it in that way. Aircraft, for instance, jets tend to come from top right to bottom left. That's how I display them. Second World War aircraft go from bottom right to top left. If you look at a Spitfire, it always looks better 3/4 view from above, from behind, going forward. P-51 Mustang does the same thing. So I tend to focus on that side. It may be because I'm right-handed, I don't know. There might be some psychology behind it. And it's the same with dioramas. I've noticed a lot of my dioramas are all annotated in pretty much the same way. The vehicles tend to sort of drift off in that direction as well, so I tend to sort of focus only on one side. And the ultimate extension of that thought process is the Archer, because the Archer is actually painted in that way. It's painted with a point of focus of light. So when you look at that diorama, everything is illuminated from the right-hand side, coming down. So all of the roof is illuminated, the side wall, the pillars, the tops of the pillars, the vehicle, everything is illuminated from that section. And everything on the other side that's in shadow, it's much darker, it's not as painterly. Everything behind the walls that's in shadow isn't really painted properly. It's blocked out, but it isn't. So I've got sort of focus that goes through the diorama. And it's something that I've sort of found more and more interesting over the sort of the years. And certainly this year, I've kind of looked at it along those lines. So there is no turning it around. I'm not, don't turn it around. If you turn it around, you're basically just going to see open expanses of unpainted styrofoam on the other side of the building. It feels like it's a bit like, when you look at, you see behind the scenes of movie sets, and you see them on the screen and they're complete, and you can see these amazing, Wild West streets with cowboys going down on horses, and everything it just looks like a sort of a turn of the century kind of street in Texas or whatever. And then the camera pans back, and as it pans back, you can kind of see buildings in the background from the cityscapes, or, you can see where the cameras are and all of those kind of things. So I guess that's almost an extension of the fact that a lot of my modeling goes into print. I very much discussed this in something that I wrote recently, in that my job in all of this is to build 3-dimensional replicas to create 2-dimensional images. I distill 3 dimensions down into 2 because it goes on the page and you look at it on the page, and I'm basically asking people to sort of forego their own experience to understand what this thing is in the round, in the flesh, really. But it's a cheat. My dioramas are a cheat. They're only there to be seen from that point, and I don't worry about focusing on kind of anything else. If I went back into competition, which I'm never going to do, but if I went back into competition, I would then have to reconsider that. I'd have to think, yeah, people are probably going to look at this from the other side of the table. So I probably need to have a look at what's on the other side of the action, what's out of shot, if you like. But as it stands, I'm happy for people just to see the bits that I've finished and ignore the rest, I think, is the kind of the way I go with all of that.
You mentioned one very important thing when you talked about not including, let's say, interiors of buildings. I don't know who talked about that in a book or in an article, but everything that doesn't serve the main story needs to go away. So I read this all the time in the comment section. When you're going to build a house with an interior so we can see it from the back, if it serves no purpose, then why waste your time with it? It has nothing to do with the main scene. If it's a bombed building, then sure, definitely. If it's a 2-story building and the top story is bombed, then make that see through from the back. But the rest, why bother?
Yeah.
The other thing, the framing of the scene, or dressing the scene with nice walls and everything. I kind of like to go the extra mile, and I like to dress up the backside as well. Even when I was trying to integrate the large French house into the diorama, I did a lot of sanding and filling so it would look seamless with the wooden sides of the scene. It's not really important, really, because I'm not even showing it in a video. in the final 360 shots, I always make a cut because there's nothing really going on there. But on the other hand, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of perfectionism in me, but it makes me happier when I know that everything outside the diorama is clean and tidy. And that's the other thing, because, okay, this is kind of subjective and everyone has different opinions about it. What color should be the sides of the diorama? I personally like black sides because they're unassuming, they don't draw any attention. Wooden sides with some wood stain are nice. They look a little bit too fancy to me and maybe a little bit old-timey, but they're cool. And there's one thing that always makes me think hard. Sometimes you see dioramas, for example, Per Olav does it, when the sides are covered in photographs or it's a cloth with a print on it, be it a map or some historical photos or whatever. It looks gorgeous, but I'm not quite sure it serves the purpose. You know, it makes the whole piece look beautiful. But I was having a discussion with an actual artist who makes paintings about this. And he said, yeah, black or dark gray, something that's unassuming. Because if you go to an art gallery, those paintings, they're not displayed in, you know, intricate golden, weathered, whatever picture frames. And that's basically what the sides on the diorama are. It's a 3D picture frame. So yeah, that's up to everyone's own taste. But I personally like to keep everything nice, clean, tidy, you know, smooth, straight. Because maybe it's a little bit of a childhood trauma, but I attempted dioramas when I was younger, like 15, 16, but I never finished them. And the main reason was because I completely botched the frame of the diorama. The sides and everything, they started warping. Sometimes they started falling apart. And what was the point then, you know, when the diorama wasn't when it wasn't even holding together? And I knew it would look awful. And okay, maybe people wouldn't know this, but I would know it was there. And I think the worst case is when you have unpainted Styrofosaurus pens. Okay, if it's not going to be visible, then it's cool. But I've seen a lot of dioramas or sceneries that are beautiful, but they're just plopped on a piece of that large bubble, that white styrofoam, and it's just sticking out of it. It's like it's carved with a knife, and it's painted brown or whatever, but it doesn't look nice. It's like it's part of the presentation, you know. This goes back to, I agree with you about the black, and I think it goes back very much to certainly in terms of the construction of the scenes. A lot of the recent dioramas have been based on kind of styrofoam plinths that are fitted into picture frames that are black, that I either keep black as they're supplied or I spray them flat black and that kind of thing. Yeah. And then I have the sort of the edges would be the styrofoam or whatever, but they're always painted black as well. And the other thing that I do as well is that I airbrush around the edge of the diorama in flat black. So basically it goes from that black edge into almost like a graduated finish onto the diorama that creates, and then it sort of softens everything up. You can kind of see it and it flows from that. If I was building, again, I go back to this because I think it's different. If I'm building for display or I'm building for competition, if I was taking them all to Euromilitaire or wherever I was going, there would be a different thought process. But it's very much about, for me, it's very much about creating something that is going to be a tool to use for publication. So, and often what that means is that although the piece will be photographed in the round, often you can see the whole diorama on a photograph. Most of it will be photographed in detail or photographed with a background behind it, which I will crop out to make it look as natural as possible. But I very much agree with you on that. I think presentation is really important. And I've seen some stellar work out there destroyed completely by poor presentation, where you've had a diorama that's amazing. One of them that really, really stands out, actually, is the Paris gun that Louis Pruneau built. If you've ever looked at that diorama, and there's lots of photographs, obviously, in the super dioramas book that Francois did. But if you look at the picture of him, he's on the grass and he's got his arms down like that, and the diorama is in front of him. It's on a piece of like laminated hardboard. That's what he's used for it. And basically it's just been kind of rough cut around, and then he's put cardboard on the top of it to create the concrete
base of the model of the diorama and then built everything up around it. It's not presented at all. It's just done. He's almost built it just so that he can carry it around on this piece of board or whatever. It's a very strange kind of thing, and I found that kind of quite incongruous when I saw the actual sort of diorama in the book and that kind of thing. But yeah, I very much agree with you. Presentation is so important with dioramas for them to be successful and for you to put them out. But I agree with you over the black. I've used black for years as a base, mainly because there's nothing cheaper than going out and buying a black picture frame and using that as your kind of base. You know, that you don't need to go out to a wood shop and get something cut that's nice and neat and tidy and then spray it or whatever. You can just go out and get something like that, and they come in, from the cheap end up to sort of way more expensive products. Black always seems to show it off. I'm not sure how I feel about the printed photo edges and all of that sort of thing. I honestly, I agree with you. I think it can look spectacular, but to me, it just looks like it distracts from what's in the diorama. And if the first thing I see is that edge, then I'm not focusing on what's actually on the plinth. I'm sort of, that's taking away slightly.
It's like watching a movie with subtitles. You're always halfway focusing on the titles.
And the other thing as well is about that is if you need all of those embellishments to tell the story or to tell the viewer what your diorama's about, maybe you've not hit the mark with that. I mean, for me, if I'm doing, a vignette that's got a vehicle and some figures on it, I don't really need to explain that. It's a vehicle and some figures. So, but if you've got a story that you need to tell, or it's based on an actual photograph, or it's based on an event or something like that, then add some literature next to it. Do a little, presentation next to it or something, but keep the base as simple as possible. But I don't know. Maybe it's just something I just don't necessarily understand. I don't know, but I'm not a big fan of it, I have to say.
But again, you made an interesting point about how you spray a little bit of black around the diorama. So your dioramas are like a cutout of the real world, but the edges are slightly feathered. They are slightly
they're feathered.
Yeah. In my case, they're straight, sharp cutouts. There's no feathering around the edges. But there's another thing. It kind of goes two ways, because I think a part of the presentation is when everything is neatly contained inside of the diorama, but not in a way when it looks like it's arranged in this confined space. I was talking about that in the A7V diorama video when I was placing the wood scatter on the ground. Make it tidy, contain it into the diorama, but don't make it look as if I was trying, to squeeze all of that rubble in there. So when I was gluing it in place, I made a lot of those sticks protrude from the diorama, but once they were firmly glued in place, I cut them carefully so they would be flush with the sides. But on the other hand, sometimes I think this can improve on the diorama when you're, for example, trying to portray motion as if the tank is almost running away from the scene, Let's say a tank running over a hill. So then the diorama itself, the base can be smaller,
Yes.
Or there can be many other scenarios where you can use that to your advantage. But again, there's something satisfying knowing that again, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, when I like the sides being clean, straight, and smooth everything. It also applies to all these elements on the ground or even in the air. Telegraph lines, for example. When I was cutting the telegraph lines on the Yak Panther diorama, I used the straight edge that goes all the way up, and I carefully cut them flush with the size of the diorama down there. And then it's satisfying when you're, for example, arranging your dioramas in a display case, and you can just slam them against the side of the, and nothing gets damaged.
I mean, that happened. The Archer diorama features a corner building, and I did the same thing. I had a giant, right angle straight edge, put it against my deck so I could work out the shape of the roof on the top. And it sort of took me a while, and then I had to sort of work out exactly how to annotate that building so that when you look down, you could see that the roof lined up exactly with the line of the building. Nobody would ever be able to see that in the photographs, but I kind of wanted to make sure that it was like that, and there was no There was no sort of off points with it, really. That's certainly something I try and get as much as I can. It makes it sound like I'm completely fly about the way that I sort of design these things. But like I say, everything has to line up from that viewpoint. So everything would need to be in place and where it needs to be. So I don't have things misaligned. For instance, there is a building, there's a pillar next to it, a gate, another pillar and a wall, and it sits on a small section of pavement sidewalk. And I made sure that they line up perfectly. So I put a straight edge against the edge of the pavement, so that when all of the other elements came in, they butted up against that straight edge, and I marked them out so that when you look at it, they're perfectly in line. They're not off, so that you're not distracted slightly by that. But going back to what you said about sort of, you mentioned almost kind of like in passing, the idea of size of diorama. My approach has always been to make a diorama or a vignette as small as I possibly can to get the action across. And that way, you're focusing the viewer down to as small a piece as possible. They don't have to see anything superficial around that. Then you're not running in the risk of having areas that you have to fill with accessories or features simply because you've got some space on the diorama that's away from the core part of it, the vehicle or the figures or the building or whatever. And that's awesome. People will say, well, how do I approach diorama? What would you suggest? And I always say, make it smaller. I've had friends who've built dioramas, and they've been like 18 inches by 18 inches, and there's been a small building, and then there's been a couple of vehicles and some figures and everything. And, and they go, what do you think? And I go, make it smaller. Make it a third of the size. You'll still be able to tell that story. You can still have the vehicles in there and the building and everything. Cram it in. A guy got in touch with me this week talking about that, and he was saying that one of the things with the Archer was that it goes through a gate, and there are wooden gates on the other side of it. And he said you wouldn't have had a 17-pounder gun firing through that gate because the blast would have made the gates just basically flop all over the place and everything. And he said, did you consider making it bigger so that it looked like it was kind of away from the action, so that you wouldn't have had the physics involved of a gun blast? And I said, absolutely not, because if I was to do that, I would basically be diluting my idea away from the way it was. With dioramas, one of the things that you've very much got to do is you've got to heighten reality. Every successful diorama is a heightening of reality. It's very much like a two-dimensional painting. You're trying to hook people into something, or a film, or a book, or if you watch, you watch a war film. Saving Private Ryan, a good example of that. You watch Saving Private Ryan. It's heightened reality, but you're not losing the core part of the idea because of that heightening of reality. It's actually drawing you in more. The ones that I like the most of my own work, and I would never judge anybody else's work on this basis, but the ones that have been the most successful for me have been the ones that have been the smallest and most restrictive in terms of space. The Archer, I think, is probably one of my all-time favourites. The Panther that I did last year, Once a Hunter, which is the very old Tamir Panther in the ditch with the cat on it and the pigeons flying everywhere, is as small as I could get that model onto a base without it doing what Martin talks about and having bits hanging off, having the tracks hanging over the edges or the gun barrel hanging over the edges or whatever. That's the smallest I could get that piece and tell the story. And that's kind of what I like. The ones I feel are not as successful tend to be the ones that are bigger and more open in terms of space, where I've had to fill with superficial accessories or structures or whatever that weren't necessary in the first place. And what causes that a lot of the times is that you've bought a base, a picture frame, or you've bought a base or whatever, and you're going to use that base no matter what. And it's the same with kind of buildings or whatever. You've bought a building, you're going to use it in that space, and you're hamstrung by what you've decided to use in terms of what you're going to put the diorama on or what you're going to put with the diorama and all of that kind of stuff. And if you have a building that's too big for the tank that you're putting in front of it, for instance, you're then going to find that the rest of the diorama enlarges itself around those two pieces unnecessarily. Whereas if you created a building that was very much more in sympathy in terms of size with your vehicle, then it would work more successfully. I've got a diorama building building that I've had for, years, made by Royal Model. And it's beautiful. It's a very tall, it must be almost, I guess, 10 inches tall, 12 inches tall. And it's of a section of an Italian kind of building, an Italian kind of house, and it's 2 levels and it's got steps on it and everything. I can't find anything to put with it that makes sense, that goes with it, that balances out the size of the building with the size of a vehicle. The only thing I could think of would be something along the lines of like an elephant or something like that, that was operated in Italy, or an elephant. But even then, I feel like the building would dominate the scene so much that I just haven't used. I've never used it. I just don't know what to do with it. So that's definitely something that I would bring into play with everything I do. Make it, if you think it's small enough, then make it 10% smaller and just force everything into that space. And once you get it into that space, your idea is it means that you don't have huge amounts. What it might do, your diorama might replicate reality perfectly, and it might be perfectly accurate, but as a scene, it probably doesn't work as well as if you just pushed everything together and had it in place. And like I say, it's just the way I've approached it over the years, and on the whole, it's worked. Probably there are exceptions to that, which I could think of and really don't want to admit on a podcast like this, but yeah, that's certainly. I remember a guy had commissioned me to do a diorama, and he said, "What I want you to do is I want you to build this panther. I want you to put it in a field. Here's the base. I want you to put it in a field, and then I want you to use this rearming crew and paint all of those figures. And I also want you to have the engine deck open, and I want you to have these figures working on the engine, and I want you to put a tree in it, and I want it to be like all grass and everything." Anyway, by the time this diorama was finished, I did exactly what he wanted. I didn't deviate from his plans. It made absolutely no sense, this diorama at all, but it was what he wanted. He paid me, I did what he wanted. Honestly, if he'd asked me to paint it pink with blue spots, I probably would have done that if that's what he wanted. But by the time I'd finished, I got a panther, and we all know how big a 35th scale panther is. Not a huge thing. And it was sat in a base that was essentially 18 inches by 18 inches of just grass field, and then a tree in the top corner. So basically around this model, you got a model that would have that covered less than 20% of the area of this base, and there was nothing else on this base other than grass. And I said, "There you go, that's it, it's all finished." "Oh, I really like it." I said, "You do realise I could have got all of that under that tree in a space a quarter of the size of that base, and it would have looked better." And he went, "Well, I hadn't really thought of that, but that was the way it was." And today, and I looked at it. I remember a friend coming up to me saying, "I've seen this diorama over there in a glass display case." He said, "It's bloody awful." He said, "It's just got all these figures on it." He said, it doesn't make any sense. It's just got ammunition on it. It's got a big tree, I went, "Yeah, I built that." And he sort of flushed a bit, and he kind of looked at me and he went, "No." And I said, "Yeah, I built that." And he was mortified that he'd slagged off something that I built. But I said, "Mate, he asked me to build it like that." It was completely unsuccessful. Terrible diorama. Terrible. And I don't know what he did with it, or whether he kept it. It was a big kind of display case company and everything. I never saw it again, and frankly, I didn't want to. It was terrible, 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 terrible. It's what it is. It's what we get asked to do.
This is actually why I, for example, never use picture frames for my dioramas. It's always a block of styrofoam that's just laminated. And the biggest advantage of that, and I think foam cutter is one of the most valuable diorama modeling tools you can own, because it allows you to make your diorama as customized and fit to your needs as you possibly can get. It's perfect, because like you said, Spence, when you have a little bit more space over there and you just need to fill it with something, it already gives you that feeling when you're just constructing the basic shape of the scene, like, yeah, that's not really it. And why not be happy with your work even in the initial stages, right? Like, yeah, this is perfect. This is going to be so cool when it's done, right? And yeah, it's like the whole composing thing. It's just composing with everything, figures, size of the diorama, main viewing angle, everything. It's like when you compare it to, let's say, to movies, composition is like a script to a movie. And then the actual techniques, the fun stuff, so to say, is the CGI, the lighting, the actors, movie props, and so on. So when you you can even make a comparison with your most favorite and least favorite movies, right? Like in my case, for example, it's like comparing movies from Chris Nolan to movies from Michael Bay. You know, Michael Bay's movies are bombastic, they look good, but they're boring and dumb, you know, while Chris Nolan, his movies are nice to look at and interesting to watch. So that's like a difference between well-composed and badly composed diorama. The techniques themselves, the execution of trees, grass, vehicles can be amazing, but if it's not composed well, it's just not so exciting to look at. And even an old diorama with outdated techniques, like from 15 years ago, if it's well composed, it's still going to be pretty nice to look at even today.
You know, drilling into that question, Martin, when you're looking at a table full of dioramas, what are the elements that you think really set the work apart from others? So what captures your eye and draws you in?
Boy, I wasn't on a model show since I started building dioramas, and I didn't really care about them before, so I honestly don't know. But no, really, I think it's the overall presentation. So again, it needs to look not professionally made, but it needs to look like some care went into it, you know? And whether it's some vertical elements or if it looks compact or there's just one thing that's interesting about it, or if it's using vivid colors, for example. That's something I like about Volker's work. Like, he likes to use vivid colors. Like, his grass is always super green. Greener than your greenest grass you can imagine. And that always catches my eye. So yeah, something like this combined with nice presentation is what will, catch my attention.
Same question, Spencer.
I'm kind of, I feel the same way. I've been a big fan of Volker Bembenek's work for a long time. So, and I agree with you. It is vivid when you look at it. It is set apart because it's so bright. That's something that I've sort of learned to use over the years, is brighter colours, and the dioramas that I like the most tend to be like that. They don't tend to be overly somber kind of pieces. I think that question's really difficult because we see so many dioramas now, so many things online, that to see something that's eye-catching and unusual and different is really, it can be difficult amongst the sort of the chaff. But I think it's about seeing something where you go, that's a good idea, that's a neat idea. And I go back to my point earlier about seeing something that, captures a reality, albeit heightened. The thing that I like the most, though, does tend to be the smaller details when you look in a diorama, and Volker is exceptionally talented at this. He will put, he'll put something on a wall of a building that you haven't quite noticed before. He'll put a modern diorama, and he'll put a satellite dish on the wall of the diorama, and he'll have all the wiring that goes away from it. I like that. I like those tiny little details where you're drawn into it. You look at it and go, "God, I hadn't noticed that. That's kind of cool." To me, it's not always about technique. Technique's useful, and technique is something that we all aspire to. We all want to be as good as we can be. We want to be the best model makers that we can be. But I go back to what I talked about an hour or so ago when I mentioned Aid Station, the Shep Payne diorama. If you look at that now, I don't believe that chances are it wouldn't cause any kind of ripples. If that was dropped on a table at a major show, you'd look at it and go, yeah, it's kind of okay. It's really rough and ready around the edges and all of that. But there is something about it that is almost perfect. It's almost like looking at, if you look at two-dimensional paintings, trompe l'oeil comes into play, doesn't it? You're looking at it and you can see the detail, but when you look closely, it's not really there. It's just a sort of an imitation of what you think is there. The eye is tricked around. And to me, sometimes simplicity is more appealing than complexity. I think we went through a period with Euromilitaire going back 10 years now, almost, where you'd see enormous dioramas, massive panoramics, scenes that would turn up and they'd be incredibly involved and they'd be brilliant and all that sort of stuff. And then occasionally you'd see something that was tiny that you would have on there and you go, actually, that's much nicer because there's something really elegant about it. There's something where, the guy has just sort of sat down and he's kind of captured a moment in time. That's all you want. You're just capturing something, and hasn't tried to be too overly fussy or overly clever or overly involved. It's just captured that point. And to me, that's way more kind of appealing, I think, when it comes to dioramas. But I do like I have to say, I like them to be, I like the ones that I've liked the most over recent times tend to be quite painted, if that makes sense. They're sort of quite painterly. I like that dry brushing and washing and weathering and where everything's highlighted so that you can see all of the detail. I don't like things to blend too much into the background. And sometimes you can see a diorama where it hasn't done that. I like to be able to see detail as much as anything else, but not overly so. God, it's such a complex question, that. I don't know. Why do you like a piece of music? I think, why is a joke funny to you? Why do you like... Sometimes I watch a piece of TV, a TV program that everybody's loved, and I go, that was just awful. And it's Dunkirk. Christopher Nolan was talking about Dunkirk, the film. I absolutely hated every single second of it. And yet other people that I'd spoken to, whose opinions I respect greatly, said that they loved every minute of it. So it's funny that your dioramas, much like music or films or TV or anything like, is so subjective that one person is going to love something, another person is going to look at it and go, doesn't do anything for me, doesn't really tick any boxes. And I'm sure that's the same. I guarantee you that my work will split people right down the middle. 50% will like it, love it, and 50% will think it's just rubbish, not worth looking at. That's just the nature of a subjective medium like building models. And it's something that we just have to accept, that we're doing something that's incredibly subjective. It's unquantifiable in terms of what we look at, what we see, and what we enjoy seeing when we're looking at miniatures.
It almost sounds like, Martin mentioned the same thing that you just did with regards to a single moment, a moment of peace. So there's not a lot of drama. It's almost like maybe a candid photograph versus a posed photograph of a person.
That resonated with me completely, what Martin said there. And it sort of reassures me slightly, because other than pin down, which was a necessity, I by necessity had to use a certain type of figure for that. So it created an action scene. I refuse almost point blank to do any action scenes at all. Maybe that's the sort of the subconsciously pacifistic nature of my mentality. But if I'm building war machines, I don't really want to build them in action scenes showing people being killed. I'm interested in the history. I'm interested in the technology. I'm interested in the whole thing that goes around with it. And the machines look cool. F-15 Eagles look amazing. And I love them as a piece of technology and as a work of elegance and beauty. But the idea that I'm going to create something when you look at it and it's got dead bodies on and people shooting each other in the face, that's never going to happen in my scenes. I'm never going to build that kind of model. I just refuse. It's not something I would ever enjoy doing, and I just don't see myself doing it. So for Martin to say that, whether it's a conscious thing on his part, is it a conscious? I don't know whether it's a conscious thing on your part or not, but it's certainly a conscious thing on my part. I refuse to do that.
When I was talking about trying to make every small bit of a diorama or anything as interesting as possible, so now we have here a picture of a small portion of Volker's diorama. It's a corner of a building, of a rural building. And what I was trying to say there, it's perfectly captured here. This is a picture I often use as a reminder of how to make something more interesting. So basically it's a brick building, right? But it's not your ordinary, everyday, boring brick building. For example, the corner of the building was damaged and it's been repaired with stones. That automatically makes it more interesting. The small window above and below it, there's concrete, I don't know what it's called. it's cast from concrete. That adds another level of detail and texture. The door, it's not just a door. There's that letter box hanging on it, And for example, the stairs, they're chipped. There's moss on them. There's grass growing around the house. There's nettle. There's poison ivy. Then you have signs. There's one advertisement hanging from it. So it adds to that corner, it adds another dimension that goes away from the building, so to say. You have no parking sign there. You have street signs there, basically setting the scene where it's taking place. You have wood there. You have wooden flashing under the roof. So it's just maybe this whole piece of a building is 5 by 5 centimeters in size, and there's so much going on there, but it doesn't feel cluttered. And that's the hard part, making it balanced. So yeah, whenever you're doing anything in a diorama or even on a model, always try to think like, how can I make this more interesting? How can I add something special there? And that, like Spencer said, when the presentation and composition of the diorama already draws you in, make it worth it, getting more close to it, getting closer to it.
Yeah, that is adding as much as you can, I think is really important. I guess you've all seen the workshop diorama that I built 10 years ago, unbelievably so, 10 years ago. That workshop diorama is still the most involved single piece of work I've ever put together. Even now, I sort of look at the photographs and think, can't quite work out how I managed to do that because there's so much detail in it. And I worked on the principle that if I was building a workshop, if I was doing something like that, then it would be packed full of junk. It would be packed full of stuff. The benches would be covered with things. And it was almost that if I thought I'd put enough junk in and around the shelves and all of those kind of things, then add another 50 more items or whatever, and also make it as random as possible, because one of the things that Volker's work tends to engender in you, and when you look at it, is that level of detail when it comes to accessories, and his eye for kind of tiny little features that are almost not seen first time round. You look at them and you look at the kind of the photographs in them, and if you look at the book that was produced, that's got a load of Volker's work, and it was one of a series of books I think was produced by one of the Spanish publishers. You look at those dioramas and there's so much detail in them, there's so many little features. It's obvious obviously it's almost his driver, isn't it? When you see his work, it's almost his whole being is around micro detailing his dioramas. I can't imagine that Volker would do something like one of Shep Payne's dioramas where it's stripped back completely. His whole thing is about detail painting and accessorizing. That's the best sort of description, I think. He loves to accessorize the dioramas, and the accessories almost become as important as the core piece. You mentioned earlier on about the Paladin diorama that he did. I still think that's my single favorite piece by him. I think it's his best diorama, and I don't think he's made a better one, because not only is it set perfectly with the vehicle coming up off the road, coming off onto the road. One of the things that I love the most about that is there's a bin, isn't there? There's a wheelie bin, a kind of that's overflowing with rubbish, and there's all sorts of rubbish around the base of it and everything. That's almost a vignette in itself on that diorama. If you look at it, you could almost build that piece, put it on a separate little base, and people would love it, because that's capturing a piece of time right there, right? It is really kind of beautiful. Which is lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely. And again, like you said, he's a master of detail, but to me, he's also master of composing and presenting his dioramas as interestingly and as unusually as possible. Because, for example, that diorama is put on an oval base. And what it does with the whole scene, especially with the house, it gives it a very dynamic and interesting shape. It's like there's like two pointy mountains, the roof of the house. It looks like that. And it's super interesting. His diorama with another shtuk that's in the muddy scene, it has a bridge, but you can only see the bridge when you look at the diorama from another side. It's just composed so interestingly. And when you mentioned your workshop diorama, it also reminded me of something, because when you're composing a diorama, nothing should be perpendicular to each other. Yeah, everything should be sort of misaligned. But when you're making a diorama that's set inside, be it a factory or a workshop, you're limited by the shape of the diorama. So the walls of the scene, so to say, they need to follow the sides of the diorama. You can't place the workshop slightly sideways, because suddenly you would have an open hole in one corner. So then you're kind of limited. But again, you need to compose everything that's going on inside as interestingly as possible, because the walls are basically a backdrop.
Yeah, that actually happened on that diorama. That diorama was built with an L-shaped wall on it that I dropped onto the base, and I kinked slightly so that it was 10 degrees off or something, so that the base wasn't completely rectangular. And then what happened was that as I was laying the rest of the scene out, I found that at the front of the diorama there was an open kind of hole. So if you imagine, look at it from the top, and you're seeing the back wall go from right to upper left, and then the side wall going from upper left and then dropping down and hitting the kind of the edge of the base with about 3 or 4 inches to spare. And I looked at it and it just didn't work at all. I couldn't get it to work. And I was looking at it going, well, that looks just off. And I ended up adding another section of wall into that place that kinked out slightly. So when you see that diorama, it's actually got a stepped wall that runs down the left-hand side of the diorama, which oddly, I don't know if you guys remember this, that diorama was copied wholesale by a Chinese modeler who copied the setting and all of my accessories and pretty much everything as I'd built it. It was eye-watering how close it was to my original diorama. He'd also incorporated the mistake in it, the mistake being this additional section of wall. So, and I looked at it and thought, he's actually added that additional section that I put in there to fill that space, thinking it was a piece of design. It wasn't a piece of design at all. It was just because I'd messed up. One of the things that I found with that diorama as well is, and this is something that I think Volker excels at, and I think you've touched on slightly, you touched on it a little while ago, is this need to think outside of straight lines. A lot of people, when they build dioramas, they think in straight lines. So you have a building, you have a vehicle by the side of it, then you have some figures, and everything kind of fits in and around that. And one of the things that I've tried to do as much as possible, mostly successfully, sometimes completely unsuccessfully, is to think in asymmetry. So don't create things that are symmetrical. Don't create things that look intentionally balanced against each other, because life doesn't really work like that. I remember when I was laying that workshop diorama out, it's got a machine shop on one side with benches, and then on the other side it's got the sort of the stock area that's got the Sherman in it and all the junk around it. And I went over to a local supermarket and I went through the magazines for engineering magazines and that kind of thing. And I found one that was basically just workshops. It was people's engineering workshops with lathes and milling machines and all that sort of stuff. And I was flicking through it and I was looking at it thinking, God, these places look like they've literally been dropped from the sky. That they've just opened a building up, dropped all the junk in, and when it's landed, that's where they've left the pieces. There didn't seem to be any order to it. There didn't seem to be any thought process. It wasn't like they'd gone in like with modern factories where you go, well, we need all of these lathes to run down the wall. We need all the racking to run the other way. We need health and safety to be an issue. It was almost like, we'll just put these pieces where we can get them because they're big and heavy and we can't be bothered to move them another 3 feet. And we'll sort of see how they work. So that's what I did. And I sort of laid them out. And then I sort of twisted them around into places that I didn't think they would naturally be placed. And it worked much better by having things in random spots, making it more random and less manicured, I think is a better description. The diorama was more interesting to look at because you weren't looking at something that looked like it had been plotted on graph paper. It looked like it was just there. It was much more natural and much more kind of realistic as a result of that. And I've tried to do that over the years with other dioramas that I've created and made them offset and made people, when you look at them, be slightly disorientated by the ideas and disorientated by the setting, because real life doesn't work in parallel lines. Real life isn't set that way, and certainly not in a war zone. If you're building, a lot of the wars that you do a lot of World War II, almost exclusively World War II. Well, those settings, if you look at books that have got photographs of vehicles in farmyards or whatever, they're all offset and juggled around, and nobody's thought, well, I'll park. There's no parking bays on the side of a Normandy farmhouse, for instance. The vehicle just gets planted where it is and left where it is. And if it's offset, I think sometimes that we as modelers fall into the trap of trying to be too clever and too neat and too tidy, when real life isn't really like that at all. It's far more haphazard and far more interesting kind of as a result, I suppose. But yeah, that workshop diorama was as odd as I could get it in that sort of space within the restrictions of an L-shaped wall. It's not easy to do that, because you've kind of got to move it around. But yeah, seeing somebody copy that diorama and copy the mistake was one of life's great pleasures. Yes, it was odd, but there you go. Yeah, it's weird. It's just randomized, isn't it? It's sort of a random thing. I don't know.
Well, and coming back to the picture of the corner of the building that Martin posted from Volker, it's sort of like finding that balance with enough details and enough layers and enough textures to make it look real, but not overdoing it to make it look artificial. Like you were saying, Spencer, the corner of the building was broken down and there were weeds and there were repairs, and so you're kind of giving it that looked-in look, but it's not planned. It doesn't look like it was planned to be that way.
Yeah, maybe Martin can sort of expand on this a little bit more, because the building that you created for when you did your video and showed how to sculpt it and then how to paint it and all of that kind of thing seemed to be inspired by Volker's work on that. Yeah. So when you created that building, were you intentionally trying to make it as detailed as possible and to try and put as many features as possible into it in the same way, or was that just something that naturally evolved as the project was completed?
Yes, but again, I was limited by time, unfortunately. So I guess it would have been more detailed or better if I had, unlimited time, so to say. But I need to open up some pictures of it because I don't really remember how it looks. So yeah, I mean, it was, of course, it was inspired by historical photograph showing a building with a large advertisement and everything and door leading to nowhere at the top. And then I just started Googling different pictures of brick houses, especially from France and everything. And even that book you mentioned, it's called Landscapes of War, that has Volker's work in it. And it also has some reference pictures. So I used some of those real life references. And I just broke it down into individual segments, like call it, let's say, floors, for example, right? And each floor, let's add this here. Let's add, for example, that piece of concrete or whatever in the attic, and so on. Yeah, and then I didn't intend to add some of the final details that just came last, like, for example, the gutter or the downspout or the small. It's not even mainly visible. It's more visible from the side. There's one small thing sticking out of the roof that's basically connecting the house with the telegraph pole with an extra cable, so to say. So it's sort of framing the scene from the front and the back. And there's also a large, let's call it tube for those cables that's going down the wall and entering behind the window. So yeah, and the same thing with the windows. For example, I printed them when I was making when I was sculpting the building. And then as I was finishing it, like, okay, let's make let's say, one window completely intact. The others are going to be broken in different states of disrepair, of course. And let's put a wire mesh into one of them, just to make it different and slightly more detailed. So sometimes it happens from the beginning when I'm planning everything, and then as I'm painting it, the vision of the final piece is getting clearer and clearer. Then I sometimes come up with more ideas on how to make it more interesting, so to say, or more detailed. Luckily, when you're working with styrofoam, you can always add to it. It's a very forgiving material, so that also simplifies things. But again, for example, you can even compose buildings in an interesting way, right? Like give the not how it's placed in a diorama, but the actual shape of the building. And for example, when I'm now looking at it, it's basically a building with a shack built next to it that's built from stones. Now, I even realized that as I was painting the building, that basically the roof of the building and the shack goes in the same direction, right? So you see the roof of the main building from the front, and you see the roof of the shack if you look from behind. Well, that's not really cash money, is it? Nowadays, I would, or even then, if I had more time to think about it, I would place the roof of the shack sideways. So they'd be pointing in different directions, giving it more texture, more interest. Yeah. And you could enjoy that roof of the shack, actually, while looking at the diorama from the main viewing angle.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's what you go back to what I said earlier on about happy accidents. Sometimes it's that sort of simple little changes that make a difference. The Archer with the vehicle sort of firing through the gates wasn't how I had that model planned at all. It was originally going to be quite a traditional diorama. It was going to be a vehicle in a street, sort of parallel to a building, and that was kind of going to be it. And it was really only, I think I'd gone off and watched a bit of football on the TV or something, and the model and the building that I created were in here, and I sort of I got really frustrated thinking, I don't really like this. It doesn't really work for me at all. And I just picked the model up and I just pointed it through the gates, just went blump, sort of looked at it and thought, that's it. I've done it. That's how it's going to be. A lot of the times, I get the sense that you like to kind of plan these things out, and I tend to do that as well. And often, once I've settled on a diorama or a vignette, once I've planned that out, I get a 3-dimensional image in my head of exactly how it's going to look, and I never deviate from that ever. Once I've got that image set in my head, that's what I can imagine it on my desk. But getting to that point of visualization tends to be where the stumbling blocks tend to be that I, stub my toe on all the time. And I kind of look at them and I go, yeah, I don't really like that. And I think the biggest difficulty with dioramas and planning and creating anything in this particular genre is to create something that's a little bit different from what you've seen elsewhere. And it's one of the reasons why I find dioramas that meld a building with a vehicle and some figures so difficult to deal with and so difficult to build and create into something that I think is interesting, because you see so much of that. I'm always trying to look at something where people will remember it. They'll look at it and go, oh yeah, that's quite a memorable piece that doesn't sort of blend in with other things. But maybe the only way for me to do that is, because I find that so tricky, and it is to deal with those little details or create something that's just slightly off. You talk about the wooden shack against the side of the building where you've got them essentially facing the same way, but if you twisted one, you would have had something that was more natural, almost as if whoever built the building had added that section on as a separate part, and it had just become something completely randomized on the side of that. So it often these things do happen by accident, but I think that haphazard is much better. Go back to, I've now got that picture of Volker's model. When you look at that, one of the things that's so attractive about that building actually is it's not in any way manicured, is it? It's not like something you would see on a housing estate. There are things in there that I look, that my favorite bit of that whole thing is the broken wall, that section of the corner of the wall where it's broke, and it looks like it's just got stones put in there just to fill the space. I think that's an amazing kind of thing. It's that sort of random area. And almost the other thing about Volker's work, and I guess other dioramas that I like, don't you get the sense that it's almost in some cases, like especially his World War II scenes, they're almost like three-dimensional cartoon renders almost, sort of animated scenes. The Japanese do this very well. They have this sort of anime look at things where it's got lots of detail in, or if you play games, I'm currently playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where you've got that game design has almost kind of subconsciously come into the world of dioramas, where you have those heightened maps that you have on Call of Duty or those kind of games where you're looking at them and you could see that detail and you're wandering around. And I get that sense from Volker that he's picking up on other mediums, not just model making. He's not looking at necessarily at real life structures. He's looking at other things. He's drawing inspiration from elsewhere. He's drawing inspiration from the art world. He's drawing inspiration from comic books. He's drawing inspiration from gaming design, platform design, that kind of thing. And it's all sort of manifesting itself into his work. His work is almost unique. Actually, I can't think of other diorama builders that create settings and structures and scenes the way that he does.
That's interesting that you bring up anime because, looking at the photo, it does almost have a little bit of a Miyazaki color palette to it because it's very vibrant. It's very detailed. It just has that aesthetic like a lot of Miyazaki's films have. That's an interesting comparison. I like that.
Yeah. And Martin mentioned earlier on about grass being ultra green. You can see it in that. You can see that the bushes are ultra green, whereas I would mute those down with yellows or sandy colours to make them look like they were a little bit, more weather worn. He has no pretensions to doing that at all. He just paints it green. You look at it and go, yeah, that works perfectly in the settings that he's got.
The eye likes it. I mean, it doesn't distract from it. It's pleasing to look at, even though it is vibrant, which I agree with you. I think it's unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though it's weathered as well. That's the other thing. He successfully kind of melds the idea of bright colours, vibrancy within dioramas and weathering. He's not saying that your weathering is going to mute all those things down, because it doesn't take away from how vibrant the dioramas look. He's still using bright greens, bright yellows, bright reds, all of those kind of colours, but you can still see the weathering in there. I think that's a difficult trick to pull off, actually, and one that I admire greatly from his work. It's It seems like we spent a lot of time talking about Volker. He needs to pay us.
I've been thinking about this this whole time. Like, this episode needs to be called "Simping for Volker Bembenek."
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, he owes us all lots of beer when we next bump into him. That's right.
Well, gentlemen, this has been fascinating. Everything I was hoping for and more. I really appreciate the frank discussion into your own techniques and also talking to each other about this subject. Before we go, Martin, want to start with you. Anything new for your channel for Uncle Nightshift coming up soon?
I don't think so.
just more excellent video content.
More videos in the future, of course, as usual. Maybe as we proceed into this year, maybe I'll skip 1 week every now and then, maybe 2 weeks, like it already happened with the A7V, because the pandemic is basically over, and this whole channel started during the pandemic, so I was just a complete shut in, and I was focusing on modeling all the time. And now it's suddenly time to also live some real life and not spend like 14 hours every day just building models and making videos. So I'm gonna try to focus.
No more helicopter rides, though.
I hope so. I hope not.
Well, hopefully we'll see more content, see your work continue to evolve. Obviously, your work is terrific. I'm a Patreon. It's a great value. Look forward to your content, and you do a great job responding when I have a question or a comment or anything else. For those of you out there, if you aren't a Patreon for Martin, consider it over on patreon.com/Nightshift. Spencer, with the Legacy Collection, I believe Volume 2 is due any time now, right?
Volume 2 is done and posted out. It's gone. It's all finished. I've still got some left. I overprinted slightly, so there are some. If anybody wants a copy of Volume 2, there are some left. But as far as the Legacy Collection is concerned, for me, it's a finished project. I'm not returning to it. I've done what I set out to do. I've done the models that I set out to do. So it's time for me to move on, really. Mainly because I think I was getting a reputation for only building old kits, and that's not. And I was almost becoming a one-trick pony where I was just doing nothing but, kits from the 1970s, and I have other things to do. In terms of projects for me, I will be returning to, I'm going back to aircraft. I can exclusively reveal on this podcast that the next book that I'm about to do, that I'm currently working on, will be a book on the F-86 Sabre. So that will be the next book, and that will involve, and I can exclusively announce this as well, because I haven't spoken to anybody about it. It will involve me building, I haven't seen too many of these, it will involve me building an F-86A Sabre, of which there are no kits. I'm going to do that in 32nd scale. I'm going to do one of the Korean War Aces aircraft, which will, I think, ape the colour scheme that's in the old Matchbox kit. So that's, I think it's an aircraft that bears some, it is interesting enough to look at. I'm also going to be doing a series of books on teen series as well. So I'm going to be doing, I've done one on F-14, so I'm going to be doing one on F-15, 16 and 18 as well. So they'll be coming out over the next sort of 12 months, sort of see how that goes. So I'm definitely returning to aircraft. That's how I'm going to go. Also, next week, we'll see me launch the first of the 3 books that I produced, one on the Spitfire, one on P-51 Mustang, one on the Messerschmitt Bf 109E. They'll be offered online. They'll be offered as downloadable books through Pocket Mags in the UK for the very first time. They're not available in print anymore. They were done as limited edition numbered volumes. They're going to be available through Pocket Mags, so you can download all 3 of those books, and that will be a way for people to see them and be able to read them around the world who missed out on the printed volumes. So that's kind of an exciting thing. And what that will mean is that all of the other books eventually that I've produced, they'll all be offered as digital issues, with the possibility that I may do at least one book, maybe more than one book, as digital issue only, not as a print version. So that gives me a chance to do something and develop that. And finally, because I've got to kind of pay the bills, I guess, and this is my job, I'm looking at going down a similar route to Martin, but not with videos. I'm looking at going down that kind of Patreon route and seeing whether or not people would be interested in supporting me via Patreon, so that I can carry on doing what I'm doing and presenting material to people. The video part of it, I think it's covered by geniuses like Martin, so I don't really want to go down that route and be doing stuff that's nowhere near as good as what he does. But I'm sort of looking into that at the moment. And it's an odd thing. I mentioned this earlier, but it's about getting the confidence to believe that people would want to support you enough to do that. So at the moment, until I can work out what it is that I'm offering each month via that kind of Patreon system, I'm sort of keeping it on hold. But if I can find a way of giving people something that I think that they think will be value to support me each month, then I'll go down that route. But we'll see. But those are the plans for the next 12, 18 months. We'll see how that goes. In the meantime, I'll hopefully keep chatting to you guys. Hopefully me and Martin and our paths will cross at some point. That'd be a very nice thing to do. I'd look forward to that. So, but yeah, there you go. F-86 Sabre. That'll be the next one. But if you want a Legacy 2 book, and actually there's a couple of volumes of Legacy 1 as well still available, just let me know. Although by the time this goes out, I've just thought, by the time this goes out, unless I hold on to these, they may well have gone.
Well, highly recommended. The Legacy Collection Volume 1's fantastic, and I should have one of those copies of number 2 heading here soon. So anyway, Martin, Spencer, thank you so much. Ivan, thank you for joining us as well. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for the discussion. This is just a treat.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, listeners, I hope you enjoyed that segment with Martin and Spencer. They are two pillars in the scale modeling community. Really enjoyed getting to know them more in this latest interview. And if anything, I'm just super disappointed I was unable to make it. I had a family commitment, but it was great to hear from them both. Love having them back on. They are always welcome back, and we certainly thank them for their time. Right now we're going to segue into kind of our discussion topic. We're going to talk about a lot of things. I think a common theme with some of us right now, maybe it's due to the season, springtime, a lot more activities are going on. I think the bottom line though is bench time, and more importantly, the lack thereof it. And I think it's important to talk about the hobby doesn't just mean sitting at the bench and working on the model. The hobby for scale modeling, from my perspective, is all about enjoyment of scale modeling. And it comes in various forms. Retail therapy has been a constant thing on my plate lately, where if I get down in the dumps, I jump onto Sprue Brothers and myself feels a lot better. It could be watching a YouTube video, what we talked about, or it could just be chatting with your friends. We've had some good talks lately with some of us. We'll just throw up a little room and we'll get in and just talk. We don't even sit at the bench sometimes, or we're at the bench and we're not working. So I'd like to lead this discussion. I'll just give a little anecdote, and maybe I'll kick it over to TJ or Scott to really dive in. But the focus that we just want to talk about is what is bringing joy right now to the hobby that isn't at the bench. As I mentioned, retail therapy is one. I'll start off. I bought the new Panzer III from Das Werk back in January, and lately I just haven't been able to get to the bench. But guess what? That beast showed up, and I got it on Sunday, and it made me happy, and it brought a lot of joy back to the hobby that I've sorely missed lately because of other commitments. And something simple as that, pulling out the reference books, talking to Jackson and a few others online about 3D printing possibilities, like that is what keeps the mojo going without laying paint, without clipping parts, without applying cement. So, with that, I'd kick it over to you, TJ, to maybe talk about, you haven't gotten much progress done on your bench, but I think there's a lot of other things going on hobby related that have kept you, really in the saddle for that matter.
Yeah, retail therapy, man. You guys can see the wall of retail therapy behind me. I love buying shit. I just do. I really do. Yeah, I was showing you guys before. I just happened to be on Sprue Brothers, of course, and I sort by new releases, and they had it's technically, I guess, Snowman models, but it's made by Tacom. Their DF41 ICBM launcher, their Chinese ICBM launcher, in 1/72 scale. I don't have any Chinese subjects, but you know what? It's a big, huge missile tube on a huge truck, and in 72nd scale, which I like. Sure. Why not? And that's just getting it in my hands, even though I'm not going to build this thing anytime soon. But I got it today when I got home from work, and I pulled all the sprues out and I was looking at everything, and I was like, man, this is really cool. This missile is like 13 inches long, and this thing's huge. That's one way. And really, it's just like talking to people, our various modeling group chats, because I don't think it's been any secret to you guys, but I've not been modeling a lot at all lately, for a number of reasons. Some of it is beyond my control, and some of it is in my realm of control. And for whatever reason, it's just not clicking with me right now. But just talking about modeling, pretty much every day. I ghost out here every once in a while because I get busy or don't have access to my phone, or I just don't feel like talking to anybody. But still, at the end of the day, yeah, just being engrossed in a hobby and the discussions about it just keeps me going. And when I do have time to come down here and I'll crank something out, I know you guys, I don't think I mentioned it, but I'm working on another machine and creator kit that I started just for fun. It's a Prowler. It's my favorite of the SAFS kits. And I think last weekend I was like, you know what, I'm just going to put this thing together. I built a bunch of these. It's an easy build. Right now it's just sitting on my desk. It's all done. I just got to start painting it. But yeah, that's kind of what I do. Top of the list, retail therapy. I like buying stuff. It's fun. That's why I have so many kits.
Well, it makes it easy when Sprue Brothers will have it at your door in like 48 hours.
That is true. I want to say I went on Sprue Brothers to buy a bottle of Tamiya LP paints of Insignia White because I want to use it as a base for my Prowler. That's why I was there. Oh, and to get some rigging string because I want to bend an aerial on a Sherman down and tie it. And I wanted that like stretchy spring. They had it, so I was like, yeah, I'll buy this. And I might as well just buy this ICBM truck kit that who knows? Sure, why not?
For sure. Like you said, retail therapy. I shudder to think, many people differ in opinion of that. There's something about that brand new kit in the absence of model shows and being able to buy it. And again, Sprue Brothers, major kudos to them. They set the standard. They're faster than Amazon. I swear to God. So Scott, maybe I'll kick it over to you. You've done retail therapy, but maybe in a different sense.
Yeah, just, I mentioned earlier sort of some of my, I don't know if I want to call them struggles, but just learning the terminology, the technology of 3D printing, going from FEP to NFEP for my VAT, troubleshooting when a printer isn't working and figuring out I had a bad LCD, updating firmwares, and then playing, collaborating with other guys like Robbie Knopfs and Matt McDougall and you guys on settings, just sort of learning that process like you would learn airbrushing or anything else. And so that's been really energizing my mojo for just traditional modeling, even though maybe that seems weird. But even more than that, for me, I think people that have been listening to the show, they know that for me, a big part of my hobby, as much as I love modeling, I've been doing it since I was 8 or 9 years old. A big part of this hobby for me is very social. My friendships with you guys and with a lot of other people mean as much to me as that little X-Wing or something, that I pull. I have models from both of you guys in my case, and I'd never sell them. I mean, they mean too much to me because they represent that friendship. Jim Bates came out here to Salt Lake City, and first we went to a Jerry Cantrell concert, which was incredible. Yeah, I'm a huge Alice in Chains fan. It was really, really great. We had a good time. And then we went up to Hill Air Force Base to their Air Museum, which is, I think, a really underrated little museum. They've got pieces like they just got an F-117 and a U-2. They've got a Blackbird there, really awesome collection. But then we hung out with other buddies here in Salt Lake City. We got together and did build sessions. And I'll tell you, if you want to supercharge your mojo, help somebody with a problem. Most of the guys we were hanging with were aircraft modelers, and John Vickus is in our group build, and he has the M3 CDL kit, and he started that, and he is just lost. He's an aircraft modeler through and through, and I was able to kind of help him in a very small way. And then same thing with Jim Bates. We were working together on a little 48 scale Firefly that he got, and I was trying to kind of help him with that. But anyway, yeah, that's a mojo supercharger. So if you're feeling a little bit low, maybe get together with some of your buddies and model, or if somebody asks for some help. For me, that's really something that gives me a boost.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I'm not going to be doing much building on Friday, but I'm going to go hang out with Brian Kreiner here in Denver. And he's like, when it comes to aircraft modelers, he's up there, top of the list. And I'm super stoked to see his collection, see where he models, and, just learn and have and even have talks outside of scale modeling. I think that's important to, emphasize as well. As, we're all gung-ho for the hobby, but, I think one of the best parts about the hobby is the type of personalities you get to know. And, we have a lot of conversations, TJ, Scott, daily, if not hourly, and some other groups as well, where, we don't talk about the hobby in some cases. And I think that's just as important sometimes because you've created that, special bond with a good friend, and can lead to many other things. So the personal aspect of it is very important. And, I'd ask our listeners, please feel free to chime in, outside of the bench. What do you like to do hobby related? Or, what keeps that alive? It could be reading a research book. It could be retail therapy. It could be watching YouTube. Share that. Feel free to chime in. Let us know your thoughts. And to be honest, we could probably learn something else to put in our portfolio of ways to enjoy the hobby. And we certainly thank your engagement. I think that's another important thing too, is the engagement from our listeners, whether it's comments, feedback, likes on Facebook, everything, big, little, or anywhere in between is important and something that certainly helps me and keeps the focus on, just the hobby and why it's so great and who's out there. So,
well, I want to give a couple of shout outs, John. You brought that up. First of all, to all the people out in the Posse that are contributing to our Plastic Posse group on Facebook, besides our main page. We also have a group page where anybody can post, and man, the building and the camaraderie on there lately has been incredible. So if you haven't been over there, go check that out. But you're going to see some amazing work and some good people. And the other thing is, some of the side chats that we have, you mentioned other things besides the hobby. We were giving Jackson Stanton a hard time a little bit earlier because he's very, very young. But TJ had posted a really cool song in one of our chats. And so he went and got it and he loved it. So then he was like, okay, TJ, I loved it. So what else is there out there like this to listen to? And so TJ made a bunch more recommendations. I threw some stuff out there, but we all have sort of maybe the hobby as the common bond, but that friendship, like you said, John, really extends past just building plastic models.
For sure.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's about all. John, thanks for kind of leading the episode this time. And even though we're shorthanded again, it's been a lot of fun talking to you guys. One of these days, I guess all 5 of us are going to have to get together to record an episode.
It's one of the benefits of having so many hosts.
Yeah,
that way definitely. Someone's always available.
Yeah. I do miss the proper English. I was hoping to get an education, both of U.S. state facts and proper English.
That's right. How many hours can we go consecutively without using the term lounge trousers? we miss Ivan for sure, and Doug as well. So, all right. Well, everybody out there, thanks again for joining us. Please join us again in 2 weeks for episode 46 for more fun and discussion about all things scale modeling. Remember to spend some time at your bench, enjoy your hobby, and send us your feedback to plasticpossepodcast@gmail.com. So to all of you out there in the Posse, I guess there's only one thing left to say. Yeehaw!
Very good.
Nice.